Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the November 18th, 2015 meeting of the Village of Mamaroneck Planning Board. The first item on our agenda is a review of the draft minutes of the meeting that we held on November 4th. Do I have a motion to approve the draft minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? John?
Yes.
Lou? And Lee?
Yes.
Okay. Next item of business is Hampshire Country Club at 1025 Cove Road. If you recall, last month we had a scoping session at which we heard lots of suggestions for what ought to be included in the scoping document. We left any people who wanted to comment the opportunity to continue to comment after the meeting and set a deadline for those comments, and we did receive some. Our consultant then began to draft a proposed scope for our review. We have had that draft scope for a number of days. A few letters later came in from both the applicant and others making comments on the proposed draft scope. And our consultant has had an opportunity to review that proposed draft scope. And before we take a look at the draft scope ourselves, we have taken a look at the scope, but make any comments on it, I just want to turn it over to Stu Messenger to explain briefly what's in the scope, and second, what he's done with respect to, what his recommendations are with respect to the letters we've received.
Great,
So, Stu, thanks.
thanks. So, putting this together, the way we did this is we took a look at the applicant's scope. We took a look at an alternative scope that had been submitted. We read the transcript of all the hearing comments, and as I think you remember, we were here and reviewed them in real time. We looked at the application. We became familiar with your planning and zoning laws, and putting all those things together and then considering our experience in drafting scopes and responding to scopes, we prepared this draft. I've reviewed it with your council and with your planner, and Stuart and I have also looked at it on a couple occasions. I'm pretty confident that it's a pretty thorough scope, that it responds to the major and the real issues with respect to the project in an appropriate way. And I think it provides sufficient guidance to the applicant to prepare a document that lets you folks begin taking a hard look at the project. Don't forget that this is the first, an early step in the project. So the public and the applicant and others are all going to have additional opportunities to comment and to participate in the process. And that will kind of lead me to the review of a couple letters that we got today, and I think that you folks have seen as well. There's two letters, and I just want to take the points raised in those and give you my opinion of whether or not you should make changes, and if so, what they might be. The first one is a letter from Mr. Cass that was received today. The essence of the recommendation is that we provide more detail, specifically the number of units to be analyzed in the condominium alternative. And we would recommend that you not make that change. We think that this alternative is here to let the applicant make a case or make a statement as to what this alternative might look like. We don't really have a basis for giving a number for it at this time. Our thought is that when you see it in the DEIS, the way the DEIS is written is it asks for a comparison of impacts between each of the alternatives and the applicant's preferred alternative. And so when you have a chance to look at the comparison of this alternative, you may then choose to ask for some alternative number of units other than what the applicant has proposed. So we think you ought to keep that one as it is. Okay. The other letter that we received today is from Mr. Zarin. I think it raises 4 major points. I'm going to take them out of order, and I'm going to talk first about a heading called Level of Plan Detail Required for Completeness that focuses on 2 items. One is with respect to pressure-reducing stations and water booster stations, kind of an engineering matter, and the other has to do with infill and infiltration in the water system. And the comment essentially is that the level of detail that we're asking for in this scope is too advanced for this stage in the process. It was not our intent to require a detailed study such as videoing the water system, or rather the stormwater system, or rather the sewer system. I'll get there. For infill. It wasn't our intent to ask for detailed engineering designs of the water system. And so we think that can be corrected or clarified by inserting in three places on page 8 of the scope the word conceptual in front of the descriptions of these matters, so that we can kind of convey that we're not looking for the kind of level of detail that the applicant was worried about in these comments. We think they're fair comments, so that would be the way to address them. The next.
Can I comment on that?
Yep, sure.
Is, because I disagree with the letter that it says that these calculations are after the site plan approval. And will we have a chance to have such camera scoping before their site plan approval?
That's going to be up to you guys in terms of the site plan approval process, whether you want to go that. Here we're looking for sort of conceptual level, is there a problem, and how would they go about addressing it, but not the actual design of the solution.
The inflow and infiltration comment comes from the county planning department. And so once the conceptual level of information is provided, that may lead to other questions on the DEIS itself, and there's always opportunities for board members and the public to comment on the content of the DEIS and raise any issues that they have with respect to what's in the DEIS. So there will be other opportunities, of course, as we go through the site plan process. There'll be a number of additional opportunities to flesh that issue out if you see fit.
Okay.
Thanks. The third issue, level of detail related to the visual impact analysis. Here the applicant, the way the scope is written is it says that the specific points to be simulated will be determined in consultation with the village and its consultants. The applicant has asked that we identify those points now. The intent here is to have the applicant do 2 steps before we identify the locations to be analyzed. And those 2 steps are spelled out in the scope, but they're not tied into the identification of the points. The steps are that we don't know where the built project will be visible from until we do the GIS zone of visibility analysis. The way that works is they model the site after it's built, and so you have to assume 16 to 18 feet of fill up to in places, and then the buildings that are built on top of that. And then the model determines where the site is theoretically visible from. And then we ask them to do a balloon simulation of several points at that and drive around and take a look. And based on that, determine where we should do the simulations from. There may be fewer than they had proposed in their scope. There may be more. They may be exactly the same and they have it right. But I don't know absent doing those 2 steps. And so what I would recommend we do is just add some language on page 11 that would tie those 2 steps to the choice, so it's clear what we're trying to do there. Questions about that one?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, so then the last request in this letter has to do with eliminating the no-fill alternative. The argument here that the applicant makes is that we're prejudicing the application in some way, and that's really not the intent. We're not making any kind of statement one way or the other as to whether or not import of fill conforms or does not conform to regulations. What we're really trying to find out is it possible to build some number of units on the site without importing fill and whatever impacts might come from that. And the applicant in his letter has said that it may not be possible to build any. And if that's the case, then we'd be fine, frankly, with getting rid of this alternative because it would be equivalent to the no-action alternative. And I'm not sure if we want to engage in a debate about that, but that's our thought about that. It's just intended to see what could happen if the applicant says, you know what, nothing can happen, then there's no need to go further. It's the same as the no-action alternative. So those are our thoughts on the comments we received. And then you guys may also have comments or things you want to talk about.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Well, I'd just start by saying, with respect to the no-fill alternative, since the applicant has effectively conceded that this is equivalent to no action because they can't do any building without fill, I'm okay with eliminating that alternative.
I don't agree. I mean, they can't do it without the on-site fill, it has to be imported.
I take it that's the position that they've taken.
But I think it should stay in until that's proven. So that's my position. It should stay in. I mean, see what you can do with what's on the site without bringing in imported fill.
It is true that I imagine that one could bring in, could take some of the fill and
Reshape the site.
reshape the surface.
Reshape the site, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
mean,
think that should stay in.
It seems to me, actually, if it's true that that's not a real alternative, then that ought to be very easy to describe.
Right.
You know, in the document, will be the easiest alternative, so there's no need to take it out.
I mean, I guess that's right. If it turns out that the no-fill alternative looks just like the no-action alternative, then.
Is there any
we can
reason
say
not to
that.
describe it in a paragraph, you know, in the final document, you know, if that's what it amounts to?
It should really be looked at, though. I mean, I'm going to ask that it really be looked at, not just a paragraph to throw it away.
Well, I mean, if the applicant wants to say there's no way that we can move around the dirt in any way to build anything, then that might be relevant.
Of course, certainly the bottom line is if it results in a handful of units, it's certainly going to be the applicant's position that it's not a reasonable alternative from the applicant's perspective, and that's one of the things that ought to be considered in terms of.
Right, which is something we can consider later
Yeah.
if necessary.
So,
We can still see it.
So,
Leave it in.
leave it in? Okay.
well,
I say leave it in.
Leave it. When-
I agree. Lee?
Yeah, I think so as well. Okay. Unless, you know, unless Les were to tell us that, you know, it legally didn't make sense to leave something in that may potentially be
Legal but
not
determined down the
reasonable,
road.
you know.
I mean, many of these alternatives are alternatives the applicant would prefer not to engage in, so it's just a question of degree, I think, at some point.
I think if the applicant's position is that that nothing or, you know, a negligible amount of units can be built, I think that essentially, to me, answers that question. And, you know, to put in this as a full-blown alternative, I don't think advances the process any at all. But on the other hand, once the DEIS is submitted and a quantity of lots is shown with the fill and impacts arise as a result of importing the fill, certainly appropriate questions then could be answered about limiting the number of units and, you know, and decreasing the amount of fill. And I think you'll get, you know, a significant amount of information if that is in fact the case as a result of the DEIS. But I think we're jumping ahead a little bit, and let's see what the DEIS produces in terms of impacts. But that's a potential response of the same question in a way can be answered as posed as a comment on the document once you have some environmental analysis as to the impact of importing fill onto the property. I mean, right now we have a clean slate. People may have opinions about the impacts, but the purpose of the DEIS is to flesh out those impacts. So I think you'd be in a better position once you had that record before you and it was being vetted, that those types of questions can get raised.
Well, so let me just clarify. Suppose we were to take that position and we were to leave the scope without the no-fill alternative in it. And then when the EIS comes in, and if it turns out, and I have no idea whether it will, that we're concerned about either the impact of transporting the fill or concerned that, in fact, the change in topography is going to cause adverse stormwater or other impacts, we can then go back to the applicant and say, now show us a no-fill alternative?
Well, it gives you a predicate. You've got, if the planning board's viewpoint is that you've got significant adverse environmental impacts that they haven't been able to mitigate, one of the ways to mitigate it is eliminate it.
So I mean, the question I'm asking is, since a variety of people seem to be quite concerned that this might be a relevant factor down the road, are we better off leaving it in now, or are we better off, as you suggest, taking it out now and then if necessary, later, asking the applicant to include that as an alternative after we,
After you've
from the
got-
applicant's standpoint, I would think that would be more time-consuming because it might result in a delay after we get a draft EIS, but
Whatever, I mean, I think, but the advantage of the second course of action is that you get to see the analysis of what the impacts of transporting fill onto the site are. And
gonna
that
get that
gives you a sounder basis for making further inquiries about mitigating those impacts.
I don't see any harm in leaving it in, so I'd like it to be left in.
okay.
I agree with John.
Yeah.
And Luke? Okay, I think that takes care of it then. I mean, we'll leave it in. There's a consensus on the board that we would leave the no-fill alternative in the scope.
As an applicant, can I just
No,
address?
we're not going to, because if we do that, then we're going to have you speak, we've given everybody an opportunity to comment on everything that we've put together, and this is a board work session, this is not a session at which we're looking for more public comment.
As an applicant, wouldn't we have a special standing to speak to our scope?
No?
No?
Okay, thank you.
Can you just clarify whether it's the importing of fill versus the reuse?
It's the importing of fill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, will you be taking any opportunity for public comment?
No. Not on this. We've given everybody lots of opportunity to comment on the draft scope. You've all had an opportunity to do that, and we're not going to prolong that at this point. So we do not expect any comment from anyone at this point. Okay.
So I would then ask the board if you have other questions or comments or potential revisions to the scope.
And I've been through it. I'm comfortable with it.
Stuart, could you just go over the initial argument you made in favor of not responding to Mr. Cass's concern about the number of units? I think I was just arranging my documents at that point.
Understood. Well, I guess my feeling is that we ought to let the applicant propose a number of units, and you can then compare that number of units to the preferred alternative as well as the other alternatives, and based on that, decide during the process whether you want to see some other number. I don't really have a good basis for giving you a number of units right now. I mean, the applicant has suggested that it be consistent with the R20 or the R30 numbers. I don't know what those are going to turn out to be. And so I don't really have a good reason to say that that's what they should be. So I think this is a place where we give the applicant some leeway to pick an alternative. If it's some absurdly high number, you know, we'll know. And if it's some absurdly low number for some reason, we'll know. And you'll ask for some other iteration of it if appropriate and you think you need to. You may not need to.
And I think nothing would preclude the applicant from considering multiple alternatives with multiple numbers of units, if that's what the
If the
applicant
applicant
wants.
wants, yeah, there's nothing, I mean, we certainly wouldn't reject it and said we only said one and.
And you gave us two or
We
three.
would-
Yeah, and keep in mind on that alternative, that requires an amendment of the zoning law from the Board of Trustees, so it's,
Sure.
I'm sure in determining the appropriate density, they'll take that into consideration.
Just so I understand in secret, what is though the process if we decide as we go a little further that we need another alternative or another alternative that should be examined, you know, becomes clear? How do we, is that easy enough for us to get into the document?
Yes, you will make comments when you receive the DEIS, when finally the board accepts it as complete for purposes of public review. And part of your review of that document, if based upon what you read, that issue comes to your mind and the board's mind, it certainly be raised as an issue to be responded in the final environmental impact statement.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I know you don't want to take comments, but honestly, you will not be able to do
Mr.
it.
Chairman, if
We're
you
not
can-
taking comments.
Okay.
Period. From either side. Okay? So at this point, what I'd like to do is take a.
I have no comments.
I know, thank you, right.
So you have a draft resolution before you in connection with the adoption of the scope. It will have to be revised to incorporate the conditions, the discussion this evening. So what I would suggest is if you wish to take a motion to adopt the final scope as submitted to you with the changes discussed this evening by the board, and then those changes will be made, and the resolution as revised filed.
Can I ask one question before we do? And ask our consultant, is one of the issues that was raised had to do with flooding on Cove Road and the fact that it's an association road, and I'm concerned about the situation if the building of the berms causes flooding onto Cove Road and it's Association Road, and the applicant's part of the association, the neighbors are part of the association, but the road is not on a mapped road of the town or village, how does that get taken care of? Because there can be flooding, and those folks in Cove Road have to turn to, in essence, the applicant to remediate that because they're part of the same association. How does that get addressed?
Well, so the first part is to determine if there is going to be flooding on Cove Road, so, or anywhere else. So the scope is written in such a way that we ask the applicant to model the flooding after the project is built. And then based on that, they have to propose mitigation. So if that in fact occurs, and then we have to think about how do we get people in and out of there, or whatever the other impacts might be, that's up to them to propose the mitigation and you guys to review it.
Right, and there's several
Step
instances.
is to determine where the flooding occurs.
Right, and there's several instances in the scope that address the issues of the joint ownership of the road and how that's going to be addressed. So I think that's covered within the scope.
Okay.
Other questions or comments by members of the board? Okay, I would entertain a motion then to approve the resolution approving the proposed scope, subject to the changes suggested by our consultant at tonight's meeting. Can I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? John?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, thank you. All right. Next item on our agenda is 620 West Boston Post Road. Oh, that's adjourned, I'm sorry.
That's been adjourned.
Okay, that's fine.
Again, we'll wait, well,
All right. So the next item on our agenda is the review of our planning consultant's memo discussing proposed legislative changes to provide for adaptive use of religious properties. And we've had a memo now for a couple of weeks from Bob. Does anybody want to start discussion on that memo? Yeah, go ahead, John.
Want to commend Bob on his memo, and I think it's got great points in it. One of
You knew that one.
However, I understand the density bonus for senior housing. And I wondered, and I thought we had some discussion about if there could be some type of provision if they provided a community asset on the first floor, whether it be like a not-for-profit art center or something that might be.
I don't remember that.
Well, I think we were speaking about the potential uses of these repurposed structures. And given kind of the unique nature of converting a church, could there be a provision for some type of maybe a density bonus if on the first floor you provided a reuse of the church for some type of community asset, not-for-profit community asset, like a
Sure, I mean.
a meeting
it's-
space, an art center, a senior center, something along those
Well,
lines.
again, for example, an art center, whatever, if it's in a C1,
Right.
that's allowed, for one thing.
Well, wait,
But
the
you're
density
saying as a
bonus
bonus
But
is what, right.
Right, I'm saying that I think
So
that
you're trying to
senior,
encourage that type of a use of all the range of uses, say in the C1, you want to push this particular or one or two other kinds of things, and you were generally saying a nonprofit, a community asset, whatever, that would be a bonus, probably in FAR or something, I imagine, I don't
Right.
know.
I'm saying maybe a unique church space might be better used as an art space, and if there was a density bonus, you might keep that unique space, and rather than put residential in there or some commercial in there, it gets used for community use, and the density bonus encourages that unique space by being preserved for the community.
I have no problem with that if the board wants, I can.
The only
put that
concern
in.
I have about density bonuses in this
Right.
area is, if you give too much of a density bonus, churches might start disappearing. Well, but I mean, but even at a quicker rate, because all of a sudden the land becomes worth more for some other purpose. And, I'm not sure that's gonna happen, but at the margin, if we're too generous with bonuses, you
Well,
might find merger of
perhaps,
churches.
Or like
a
as,
merger of churches is really dictated from other.
Depends on what denominations.
Right.
Right.
or sometimes a little bit of alternate use can save the church, as happened in New Rochelle. They've added some housing and they were able to save the church.
Well, but that would argue for a density bonus, not for adaptive reuse, but for continued use.
Well, but for part of their structure.
Yeah,
not-
no, that's right.
Right.
I mean, that's, I don't think, problematic, but sometimes, church might decide, hey, this is a great.
No, and I understand what you're saying, but
You would have to say, well, if you're going to do a bonus to encourage, say, art centers or community, whatever, it has to be, what area would you put it in? I kind of divided these things up into three
I agree.
different
The what
areas.
you said, either in C1s or right on main thoroughfare. So as you have it limited to senior housing, I would say in that area,
So
in those areas, you could do senior housing.
Your comment would be, if it's within a density bonus in a senior, then you would be able to, you would also include that as
Well,
another.
senior or
Yeah,
a
right,
community,
right.
Just
a
add a
community,
different-
Just add a-
or a community asset.
Okay.
Right.
Do you have any language that,
Well, what I was going to say is that I think the concept of what you have here is actually very positive, but I think that we ought to allow the village attorney or someone else to think about the drafting that we used. in
Oh,
this,
well,
rather than-
this was just a suggestive, the village attorney is going to draft it, period, and we'll probably ask Les also for his input in that. I had only 5 law courses, and and drafting wasn't one of them.
I think it to be more, I think more persuasive is if the planning board focus on the concepts rather than get bogged down
Right, and
in
sure,
drafting,
the
because
language. I
there's
agree.
always
Right.
people who are going to disagree, no matter who drafts it, they'll come
Right.
up with something different. So
different, right.
I would focus on the concepts.
So we could essentially stop the memo before suggestions for specific legislative changes.
Right.
Lay it out there.
Right, I would.
Well,
I mean, I think.
really, I mean, then you're really not saying anything.
Well, I mean, you
You
could,
know, I disagree with that. I mean, I think we don't want to get into the language, but we're being asked to make recommendations for a legislative change.
so I think one of the concepts would be, do you agree with the idea that, as Bob suggested, if it's a split zone property, it could be used for any use permitted in either zone?
Right.
I mean, those types of things should be in here. Those are the kind of the policy recommendations, without
in there.
actually drafting the actual law.
So Bob, could you distill the policy recommendations in here into?
Well, I think
For us?
you can essentially say that there's, the legislative approach is such and such, is focusing on adaptive reuse of areas that's the first sentence, and is recommended that board be provided with a special use permit. So, in other words, on page 3, half of that paragraph in the front, okay? Starting at our suggested legislative approach focuses only on adaptive reuse of buildings previously occupied, going all the way through to having the planning board have a specific permitting authority for these types of uses. And then essentially look at, there's 3 types of areas. There's split zone properties, and essentially keeping that in, describing what those zone properties are, and essentially at the end of that, it's proposed that all uses allowable. In other words, where I've highlighted it, that's the legislative concept.
Why don't we just sort of enumerate the
Yeah,
things
that's
that
what
we're
I'm
doing?
asking.
So like,
Yeah.
number 1, which is what Les was suggesting, for any church that's in a split zone property, we would permit any uses that were authorized in either zone. That's one of the proposals that
Right.
you're making, and I think that everybody is sympathetic.
Right.
Page 4, the italics.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and this, in fact, if this was in place, the property that we recommended on at the Straight Gate Church would not need a zoning
Right.
change.
Well,
So this
would be the
actually would
change,
have,
right.
would have been a better solution than a zoning change for that property.
Right, well, we would be, yes, essentially enacting an amendment to the zoning ordinance that would make further changes unnecessary.
Which is really where you were going when you even made the comment on The recommendation for that, we said in there that this doesn't preclude future legislative changes and whatever.
Right. So, but I think we're all good on that as one recommendation that we're making.
okay.
Now, the second recommendation that I think that you're making is that if an applicant with a church in either a split-zoned or in a C1 district seeks to make an adaptive reuse, that we ought to permit certain kinds of bonuses to facilitate that adaptive reuse, subject to a special permit by the planning board.
And,
Right.
yes, and there was certain language that we looked at, that some communities did, where to enable, to make this actually, the adaptive reuse feasible, you're modifying certain things, one of which would be density.
Right.
Right.
Right, so basically, the proposal is to provide a density bonus for adaptive reuse, but the adaptive reuse and the bonus would both have to be approved by the planning board on a special
Correct.
permit.
Would the bonus even need to be enumerated in
Well, I mean,
legislation, or is it?
The legislation
I mean,
might want to place a limit on how much the density bonus,
Right.
how much density bonus you could give.
Just to make it more.
Well, I mean,
Well,
you don't
to
want
put a
to.
box around it.
Yeah,
Right,
right.
just, yeah, otherwise.
Just for planning
yes.
purposes, for neighbors, et cetera, you don't want to allow.
And one of the things you would want to do in terms of a special use permit would be that you make a finding that, or it's compatible. You're not altering the exterior alterations, or it looks like the church building is not. And then secondly, it blends in or fits in or connects into the neighborhood itself.
See, I think there you're getting into the
You're getting into
weeds of the
legislation.
legislation. I think the concept,
Just the
the first
concept.
concept is that you're going to allow, as you said, split zone properties either use.
right.
Then if you're going to have a bonus, you could say the village board should consider whether to provide for a bonus under certain circumstances. That would be another
We
recommendation for
would
certain types
recommend
of
a
uses.
density bonus under certain, that the village enact a density bonus under certain circumstances in order to facilitate adaptive reuse.
Right, and overall provide a special permit mechanism from the planning board to kind of be the administrative arm of how this development would take place. And that's all, I think, those are you don't
Those
have
are
to.
the primary recommendations
Yeah.
that.
So, and leave out the mention of senior housing.
Well,
Well,
that's,
that's
another-
one of-
now we're up to that,
We're up
that you have to consider whether you like senior housing and put that in.
Well, to the extent.
Are we recommending that it be
Yeah.
enumerated?
Well, I mean-
Or do we give it as, or do we leave it as an example to the?
No, it's on,
What
on,
might be used as a criteria for the planning board?
Well, you don't want to give a density bonus, period, for if somebody wants to build
Right.
For-profit housing on the area, I mean, unless it's a certain kind. So what I think. what
page
John is
six,
suggesting-
page six says, planning board will find that, one, the proposed adaptive reuse would not impact the character or integrity of the surrounding area, neighborhood. Two, that it be restricted to senior housing with no density bonus. Well, that's on in the single family area. But it could be restricted to senior housing. It could be restricted to senior housing, or, as I suggest, to some community art facility.
Well, I wouldn't limit it to community art facilities.
Or whatever,
Community
or
facility.
some community facility,
Right.
community facility. And if it has frontage on a direct access to a major road, which would be the C1.
Right, I would say only if it's in
Right.
a C1 district.
Right.
Or in a split zone C1 district.
So how is a community facility going to need a density bonus? I'm just practically speaking, is the idea that it would be,
Well, the idea is that if you were going to convert a church, that you might want to leave something on the first floor and leave the assembly area as something that might be a community facility, and then rather than put that into housing, allow them a density bonus to maybe go with some more density, rather than use that space and have a better chance of preserving that historical asset for the community.
The question I think Lee is asking is, so what else would be built on the site other than the community facility, right? So if we're giving a density bonus, what we're essentially doing is allowing greater FAR than would otherwise be permitted. Well, we're permitting adaptive reuse of the church for the community facility. What else is going to be on the site? Are we permitting a retail store? What is it that we're thinking about?
Whatever they propose and we decide is allowable. I mean, some housing above the church, or?
Well, all right, but then that's,
I don't think that's going to be so left wide open. The
Yeah.
legislation is going to have to guide the planning board as to what they can permit. So that's what,
Right.
I guess Bob is saying, that in addition to the uses that would be permitted under the underlying zoning, he's suggesting, senior housing as an additional permitted use. John is talking about community facilities. I mean, those are the types of things that should be enumerated if it's a consensus of the board. But ultimately, the legislation that would be adopted would have more specific guidance. The village board would have to embrace those concepts and then reflect it in the legislation that they would adopt.
so Bob, in terms of just because I want to make sure I understand what you want here, what you're proposing. In terms of a density bonus, you're assuming an increase in otherwise permissible FAR.
Correct, and I think I specify
Right.
what it is.
But so what I'm trying to figure out.
Because of, I used senior, I used, we have in the code 62 years of age or older.
But what I'm trying to figure out is I'm trying to address both the issue that John raised and the issue that Lee raised. If we were to expand this beyond senior housing, what would this look like? What would somebody build? You're preserving the church, now what? And I'm just trying to figure out what else is going to be on the site.
The only thing I could.
You're not really expanding the existing building anyway. I mean, you'll be building a new structure. Because if you're expanding the FAR and you want to preserve the existing
But
structure.
you would
which is
be,
the church,
yeah.
Basically, you would build a senior citizen structure next to it. So basically, you are now building a new structure.
No.
The concept was
So how you,
to,
you're just gonna, you would use the existing structure of the church to turn it into a community center?
No, I'm not saying the whole thing. I'm not saying the whole thing.
Okay,
You
so
know?
where would the added FAR go?
The FAR may go above.
Above of the structure, of the so-called church structure?
well,
So it will be within the same structure?
Or above
that's
it.
my idea.
Yeah.
It was in the same structure.
But if you do it within the same structure, usually you're just gonna change the whole character of
How's
the
that,
church.
yeah.
Yeah.
So basically.
Internally,
Huh?
not
Architecturally.
not
Internally or
externally.
externally, I mean, it just,
Right,
I
it
see
won't
what you-
externally look like a church anymore. And then-
no, but that was just my question, but if you're gonna add FAR, my question.
One way to do it is just put another building on it next to it, right?
Right, that's what I would take it.
Yeah.
There's only one place where I've seen that happen in one code, where they allowed you to expand onto the existing structure, and I think it goes up to, I think it's 15% or whatever expansion. And I think they put in that you had to have it very similar look and feel to the existing structure. But it's one of these things where, John knows with historic, it can be dissimilar, but it has to be sympathetic to it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I've seen that.
Like a
Also-
fence around an enclosure.
Right.
Right.
Yes, right.
And they see you now.
The only thing is that it's really oriented towards more very historic structures, number one. They usually do it, things that are either eligible or are listed on the National Register. I'm just talking about the codes I've looked at.
Can,
I don't think the problem here is to make it, I mean, the historical preservation here is not the issue.
That's why we didn't go that
That
way.
could always be part of it. I mean, I'm just trying to look at an existing structure, an existing church.
I think we're looking at it and saying, well, it should still have the same exterior look and feel and characteristic of,
So-
that's all.
But
Yeah,
Bob,
We wouldn't
we-
expect,
Well,
we wouldn't
let's not-
expect anything less, but I just think that, yeah,
yeah. Can we just make it real for a second here, so I understand, I mean, what are we trying to solve here? What's the concern? What's the scenario right now? Say, the First Church of Christ Scientist on Fenimore, was to go up for sale. What are we worried that's gonna happen to that building under the existing code?
demolish. It'll probably be demolished and a new structure will be built.
What could be built there?
It could be, it's an RM2, so it could be an apartment building.
but I didn't know that was the real concern. I think the real concern was that it's not going to be sold, but it's going to lay vacant.
Right.
And in order to encourage the maintenance of the building, but put it to a productive use, that was kind of the predicate for this. Now,
Exactly.
in connection with the senior housing, to the extent that it's permitted in the village code, are there density bonus provisions connected with senior housing? And if they're not, why are we creating them here when they don't exist otherwise?
But if the concern is about it just becoming vacant, you know, the village and this board has more time to deal with that kind of problem. If it became a problem over time, then with vacant churches, we could do something about it. I think the
problem-
real concern is that, you know, the village doesn't put something in place and churches that we would like to see get preserved actually get.
Well, here's the predicate for this. Remember that this referral came as part of an actual application to do something else in a church structure, and the existing procedure required approvals from every board in the village, which is, you know, a very onerous
Well, but
procedure.
we would take care of that with the first recommendation we started with, which is allowing uses in either of two zones when we have split
Correct,
zone
but-
property. That would have taken care of
but-
that one without doing anything
Right,
else.
so.
And so now the question is, I think everybody
Yeah,
agrees
let's-
that would be a
let's
good
build up-
idea.
But let's build up what John said
Yeah.
first, which is basically, we have a church structure.
microphone
we
next
want
to
to
his
preserve.
Could you just?
We have a church structure and we want to preserve it. So the next set of steps is, will you bring in a senior citizen home, right, housing? Will it- Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
So, you're talking about senior citizen at the structure, at this existing structure. And then you'll be talking about the community center at the existing structure, right? So if
No, I'm saying or a community center, okay, which just gives an opportunity to preserve something on the first floor. For instance, if you took,
And if it's not big enough for both, you would be adding on to this particular church.
or rearranging it. Remember when I did the train station, I lowered the interior floor and I created upstairs offices by keeping the first floor as a restaurant, which preserved the historic nature of the building. So this would allow things to happen within the building, that if you kept something that was of historical significance on the first floor, you could rearrange things. I added dormers that weren't there before on that building at the train station.
Right, but-
You add dormers, you
But
add
it's not a
something.
residential, but it's not, it's an office, but it's not a residential, because the residential brings in.
Well, I'm saying
brings
in
in
one
a
of these
whole kettle of
uses,
fish. It's
but
a
in
whole-
one of these uses,
Right.
it might be,
No,
If
I'm
you-
actually, I agree with the preservation of the church, of the building, of the.
It's not just a church, it could be a school, it could be other things.
Yes,
Right.
yes, I'm just, I mean, I agree, I'm agreeing with that. I'm just trying to see the parameters by which that a person would be able, a developer would be able to go there and actually put it to the best use. And the best use is show the planning board what you're gonna do, and we have approval for that, right? You would have to tell us, so.
Right.
But are we also, part two now, are we also allowed them to expand on that building?
Well, we would be if we're essentially increasing the permissible density. It
The
would actually
FAR.
depend on how much density
Right.
the existing building uses, but if the existing.
So it's not only as an interior renovation, which, if it's an interior renovation, I think we all agree, right?
We don't need
Right.
to do anything. for
Right,
that.
no
Right.
issues.
Right.
But if we are expanding the building, then it's something that, even though it's permissible, because you said we would give them extra FAR at our, per our approval.
Well,
Right.
that's one of, the question I have for this is, there's already an FAR for any of these lots. And if what we're gonna do is give a density bonus above the FAR so that one could build something that's bigger than what's on the neighboring lots, we really have to make sure we're getting enough value in terms of preservation
Right.
to justify the extra FAR that we're giving. Now, we could say that the special permit process is designed to make sure we get that value, and that if the proposal is one that demolishes too much of the existing structure, then we just wouldn't give the special permit.
That's what I'm going to, because now I have a small, a medium-sized church. Can you hear me?
yeah.
I mean, now we have a medium-sized church. The person will go there, basically demolish 3/4 of the church, and he'll build and new
But I
citizens,
think
you know,
we-
so,
what
so
we
so
can
I'm
do is
losing
get
something.
control over that through the special permit process.
Right.
Right.
If you wanted to add on to something, you could put a certain limit on how much you could add in terms of percentage of the, but then you would also have other things, if you wanted to go in that direction. I stayed away from that just because I thought it was,
Well,
I
you
got
didn't
more.
really, I mean, you didn't talk about the logistics of it.
well,
but-
you know, we're not, schools are on the most, schools are really more of the issue than even the churches. So, for example, if St. Vito's, for example, is in across the street from a RM3 zone, but it's in R2F, it's been a school, Vasney gets into Westchester, they can't find another use. It might be, senior housing that would, it could be below market rate senior housing, nonprofit senior housing that you might want to, that'd be a good thing to do. And schools have limited uses. You know, I think it's almost schools more than churches in some sense, but.
Stu, I'm worried about your concern that we're sort of would be encouraging a change of use that we don't mean to be
Right,
encouraging. I mean, I honestly hadn't even thought of that, and that seems like the worst possible outcome.
But we still have the right to control that. I'm saying, let's say Most Holy Trinity, you could keep the,
But that's not as much of a problem if you're saying that the commercial or, split zones, either uses could apply to the entire site. So that's,
Well, but we could also be providing a density bonus for sites like that, and I think what Lee is saying is if we provide a density bonus, maybe not in that case, but in other cases, you might be encouraging some amount of adaptive reuse, where where absent the density bonus, the existing use would stay. And that's, might be a concern, if you gave too much of a bonus. If the bonus weren't so great, then maybe it's not such a big problem.
Of course, adding the density bonus to the equation is going to increase the scrutiny that you're going to have to undertake for seeker purposes as well, because you have to analyze what the potential impacts of
Well, you-
allowing that density bonus.
I think, as you said, you could balance the benefits of what you're getting. But I'd rather see Most Holy Trinity not have residential right on the first floor and keep the facade and maybe have some community facility, the church, and do housing on another part of the site, rather than have
Is it not-
these churches where
Not possible to keep
it's,
the facade on the first floor?
or maybe, but maybe you want to keep something in there rather than people walking right off the street as residential. And therefore give it, so that they can use that for something else and put the housing on another part of the site. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is,
No, I get
I
it. So
also
just
had-
my concern, and I feel like you're saying, well, we wouldn't have to grant, I mean, it's a special permit, we wouldn't have to grant the density bonus if we didn't want to and all that. But once you put it in the code that there is this density bonus, available.
that's only if you're only if you're providing,
But just
only
if you
if.
look at, in practice, that draws the applicants and the planning board, is not good at rejecting
No, but that also
applications
draws,
for special
that will
permits.
draw an applicant also to look at structures that are basically falling apart. I mean, yes, Holy Trinity is a good example of something you want to preserve, but maybe there's also other structure of church structures or schools that need to be utilized, need to be renovated, need to be utilized for some further. So we should actually tell the developer that yes, that you are welcome, because we will work with you on that. It doesn't mean that we are changing what we already have, right? I mean, you don't want to be stuck with a building that it's in 5-10 years.
I'm not
will-
suggesting that. I'm not saying the density bonus is only if they're providing a community asset
I-
that we find is beneficial.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just don't want to make a blanket statement that basically a developer goes into a site and he uses a half of the church, and basically he demolishes it, and he basically builds something else, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I
First of
mean,
all,
we might
it's
want to have
hard to do
standards.
residential with churches.
I'm sorry?
Say that again?
It's hard to do residential
Right.
with churches. It's easier to do it with
Right.
with schools. Or
If it's a
whatever.
large church, yes, but, Holy
We
Trinity.
might also want to have standards about how much of the existing structure is preserved.
Exactly.
Before anybody would be entitled to any sort of a density bonus.
Well, I think we have language in here that we essentially need to be satisfied that the exterior was maintained, or I forget the language I had in here.
But maintaining the exterior is probably going to be difficult. That's the problem, if you're going to,
That's why we're
I understand that, but,
Well,
you
that's
know-
a safe change to say.
Right, to say,
It may
yeah,
not
it's-
do enough,
right.
but it would be safer.
Right.
As a condition of the permit, the applicant shall demonstrate that all exterior alterations of the adaptive reuse shall be generally consistent with the original structure's architecture and the neighborhood in which it's located. That's what.
All right.
But I really was hesitant, I didn't really, for density bonuses, the only reason I did it for areas that they have a lot of different uses, and maybe you want to push them into one, as John was kind of indicating. And senior housing, I hit on because maybe you don't want to have regular housing, you want to have senior housing that has less of an impact, that's all. So, but
But look,
I mean, is there any, but that seems orthogonal to adaptive reuse. I mean, if there's, needs to be something in our code to encourage senior housing versus regular housing, that's kind of a separate issue. That could be a bonus in general.
No, but I think-
So why conflate the two?
well, I think Bob is saying that senior housing is less likely to have an impact on the site in terms of traffic and other issues than regular housing might be. They're likely to be fewer cars, fewer needs for
You
parking.
could say that for any site, that's important and that the neighbors would.
Right, but if what you're
would value
concerned,
that, yeah.
but if you're concerned about preserving the nature of the existing church or school, that might be something you think is more important there than it would be with some respect to some other site. I think that's the, at least
that's what I was trying to get.
what Bob was trying to get at. But I agree with you that, in general, you might have the same issues with other sites as well.
Well, yeah, not to mention that you are now providing a service to the community.
I mean, I'm all for it. I'm just wondering whether we're confusing two issues that don't need to be.
And perhaps Les was correct when he essentially told me to cut out about 5 pages of this and really just get to the concepts and let the written legislation kind of follow from that.
Right, and of course, if legislation is developed, it'll come to the planning board for critique and review and comment.
Well, why don't we try to get to at least the common ground and make a strong recommendation on this? And so, number one, we, I think, all agree that with respect to property that is split zoned, that we ought to authorize the use, that any use that would be permitted in either zone, if we're dealing with a church or other community facility. There's general agreement about that, right?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay. And so the second issue that we're talking about now, where we're having a little bit more
I
trouble.
can see why you're a professor. Because you're leading us, thank you, Professor. You
Hopefully,
really helped.
Yes.
hopefully to a conclusion.
Right. But his true goal in law school is to lead the students to that conclusion.
So the second issue, which we're having more trouble on, is what sort of incentives should we be providing for adaptive reuse other than authorizing uses permitted in either one? And we all agree that it would be good to provide incentives. What we're not yet at a position of agreement about is what those incentives should look like. And it may be that what we ought to do is just make a recommendation to the village board that it ought to consider providing some incentives for people to make adaptive reuse, and those incentives might include density bonuses for some facilities. We're not gonna draft the legislation anyway, so I don't think we need to do more than that.
I think that's,
That's very
I
lovely.
think that's punting though, that, expecting them to come up with, they've asked us to come up with a recommendation, saying, we can come up with a recommendation, but we can't give you, we're afraid to give you concrete ideas,
Well, you
seems
could,
weak
as he
to
said,
me.
as Stu was saying, you could say, considering, to encourage adaptive reuse, you could do density bonuses for items such as you know, affordable senior housing, for community facilities, and similar things that would meld in with the, with the.
I don't
I
want
mean,
us to
if we don't
draft
want
the
to act, if
legislation.
we think that we're not sure when, and that in this respect, that's fine, but to sort of pretend that, you know, we'll just leave it to the Board of Trustees and they'll act, doesn't seem.
No. I think we are sure that we want to provide incentives, but we don't want to do what Bob tried to do in his memo, which is draft legislation. That's a really bad idea for us to do on the fly from the board. That legislation is going to be drafted by somebody else if the village board has a taste for it. And I think it's enough for us to say that we would like to provide incentives in the form of perhaps density bonuses, or, I mean, this can be done with devices other than density bonuses. There are other ways to provide incentives for reuse. That's a particularly, you know, common one, but it's not the only one. And we would like to make sure that those bonuses come in the form of something that produces a community benefit, which might be senior housing, it might be some other community facilities, and we would suggest that, you know, that be the subject of drafting, which we'll later review, rather than sitting down and trying to draft from the floor. That's all I meant. I wasn't trying to say we should do nothing, but we should not be, you know, just.
Okay, in that scenario, who ultimately will draft the, you know, these ideas?
Well, first there's got to be, when the comment memo goes back, a level of interest at the legislative level to go forward.
There's interest
Assuming
in
there
that.
is, then the village attorney will be requested to draft it. And
Some of
then
the
that
trustees have
that
said, "Are you gonna
legislation
get this in
would,
by next Monday?"
yeah, that legislation would then get introduced and then referred to the planning board for comment.
Should we
And
make a
at the,
separate- Should we make a separate recommendation for the first item, which we're so?
Yes, well,
No, I mean, in terms of, I mean, especially in that it might impact, you know, a current applicant. Should we recommend that the board go
That-
ahead
that's-
and move on that,
We can-
change to allow, you know, either zone to apply for?
They're going to
zone
look at
property?
this as a.
we can do the two simultaneously,
Yeah.
and the first one is easy to draft, the second one is harder to draft.
They're already
I
in the
just don't
middle
want to
of the
hold up
first
that,
one,
that
so they're not
that
going back.
applicant.
I don't think
If there's, you know, full agreement on this board about the change that ought to be made, and there's an applicant looking to take advantage of that change,
I agree with you, I think right now we can make that recommendation, right, but we can also make the other recommendation.
Yeah, Lee, I'm not so sure there's an applicant that's waiting to take advantage of that. They're in the middle of the existing process, and the time that would take to get a new process in place, and then the new process might entail some other application that they need to make. So I don't think it's realistic for that.
They're
that-
right on
that
the verge
applicant.
of
Well-
getting something.
Well, I don't know if they're on the verge, but they're in the middle of the process. You know,
Well-
they've come here, we've made a negative declaration, they're before the Harbor and Coastal Commission, they're before the Board of Trustees under the existing regimen.
Yeah, they're in the public hearing, and they opened the public hearing, I guess they'll continue. with
I just think that this board was so in favor of that particular project that we should take a belt and suspenders approach and make sure not to delay this recommendation.
Well, we can make both recommendations in two separate pieces, if that helps.
Yes, that would, I would,
So we can, if
Prefer that,
people want
because-
to do that, we can do that. I can take a motion for a recommendation first that authorizes any church or other structure in a split zone district to make any uses on the parcel that would be authorized in either of the two districts. Right, that's essentially the thrust of.
With the special permit from the planning.
With a special permit from the planning board. That's the first item. We can take a motion on that, make that recommendation, then we can consider making a second recommendation. So do I have a motion to, go ahead, Lou?
So we're making that motion, but where is the detail language that says that you have to preserve a percentage of the existing building?
You don't. For this recommendation, all we're doing is saying, if you have
Okay, I got it,
an existing church
So
in a
this-
split
okay.
zone district, you can make any use that would be permitted in either district. We're not, no density bonuses,
So where do
no
we go
anything
to
like
the
that.
second piece of this?
And then what we'll do is, after we vote on that, what we'll do is we'll take on the second motion so that we will make two separate recommendations at the same time to the village board. And that way, the village board can, if it chooses to, decide to act quickly on one. If it decides to take them together, it can decide to take them together. But what we're sort of recommending is, one, we think is simple, straightforward, clearly right, and we would like the village to move as quickly as possible. The second one is something we also support, but we recognize that it might pose a few more drafting challenges, and so the village board is certainly free to act separately on both of them. They can do whatever they want on this. We're expressing our preference in principle.
Stu, is this, just for clarification on this first one?
Yeah.
Is this premised upon adaptive reuse of the building?
Yes, it's
Okay.
premised on adaptive reuse.
And the preface to that would be a special permit by the planning board for focused on.
Yeah, so I think there's three elements: adaptive reuse of the building, allowing uses permitted in either of the zoning districts, and then
special
subject to
permit.
special permit approved by the
Exactly.
planning board.
So can I have a motion to approve that resolution, subject to drafting?
So I'll make that motion.
Second?
Yeah, second.
All in favor, Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. And now the second motion would be to encourage the Board of Trustees to consider enacting encourage the Board of Trustees to enact a resolution or an amendment to the zoning ordinance that would provide incentives, perhaps in the form of density bonuses, for adaptive reuse that preserves much of the character of existing church buildings, so long as the density bonus is used to provide some sort of community benefit facilities.
I have the same question. What does most of the character mean?
Well, I was trying to, I don't, that's a matter of drafting, right?
Okay.
And so I don't think we should be drafting that from the floor, because nobody's gonna pay any attention to that draft.
In Bob's memo, it says it's recommended that a density bonus, this is in the multi-resident zone, and it could apply also to the C1 zone, that it's recommended that a density bonus be provided to encourage the adaptive reuse of buildings for senior residential housing, and I would propose, or the preservation of an important portion of the structure for a community asset.
Say that again, I'm sorry, John.
Or the preservation of an important portion of the structure for a community asset. I don't have a percentage, but not like you're taking the back of the place, but an important portion of the structure for a community asset. Something along those lines.
Lou, John, is that in conjunction with the density bonus portion, or is it in conjunction with just having?
No, with a density bonus if they're preserving an important portion
Right,
of the
that's what I'm
structure.
asking, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's key to that.
So but the affordable senior housing or community asset, or how are you going with that?
Density bonus can be provided for either senior residential housing or
Or-
the preservation of an important portion of the structure for a community asset.
Oh, wait.
Or another permitted use.
We've gone from Stu's very general language to something quite
I know.
specific.
I know.
I don't object to what you're saying.
But it gives the
I think
village
actually-
board more to chew on.
I think it's actually more general. Actually, it's very general because we're still saying the same thing. I'm just afraid that somebody's going to go there and to say, okay, the rear door of the church to me is the most important part of the church.
Well, but then we get
That's
to
what I'm
decide
looking
what's an
up at
important
the
community asset. We get to decide what's an important portion. What's an important portion of the structure?
Okay.
Don't come in here and tell them the back door.
Yeah.
And that's not an important part.
But what we'll do is we'll get
So,
language.
so we will have that.
Yeah, we'll have that discretion.
We'll have that discussion. Okay.
John,
I
this,
mean, we are calling out senior housing pretty specifically. I don't know if that was.
Well, let them chew on that, but
Now-
don't leave it blank.
just another clarification. So we call out senior housing, and then we talk about, I guess, any other use permitted in the underlying zoning, or any other use, period, or how do you, that's the part you haven't focused on.
Well, in multi-residence, it's permitted, and C1, it's permitted. So.
So
it would
you're
be-
saying, it's any other use permitted under the existing zoning that provides a community benefit and preserves the,
Right.
because it's distinguished from the other, first one we did, because that says you can have any use that's permitted in either of the two where it's split
Right.
zones. So this is the treatment. So we're not saying in these other zones that you can go beyond permitted uses already permitted, but to incentivize the adaptive reuse, you can consider density bonuses provided that there is some community facility or benefit, an
Yes.
important portion of
Yes.
the building. I thought, okay.
Yes.
that-
Yes.
Make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
can I have a motion adopting in what John has
On the tape.
proposed?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think
that's where we are.
Does it make any sense to provide some of the map? But essentially talking about up to page 6, and then just drop everything else off of that.
I think that,
Or-
I don't think any, the work that you've
You're-
done is
you're-
very important in getting us to where we were, and I think it will be important to the Board of
the board,
Trustees.
and then you're going to add a cover sheet essentially.
Cover memo.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay,
and
okay.
presumably what we'll do is leave all the drafting to the village attorney.
Right.
So I guess going forward, this will have to be prepared. Is the board comfortable that it will be prepared for the chair's signature? And I guess it could be circulated to everybody in case there's, last-second comments, but the chair would be authorized to sign it, as
Yes.
opposed to coming back to another meeting to
Yes.
formally approve it.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
You would have no objection to my providing this on your
Could be an
behalf
attachment to it.
Right, could be
Yeah, it'd be an
that.
attachment, because it's based upon, it
Based
could be a
upon Bob's-
preamble that there was,
Exactly.
yeah, the preamble on the cover memo.
Okay,
I mean, I'm getting paid by the word here.
we didn't realize that.
Maybe we should drop off some pages.
Right. Okay, next item on our agenda is 625 Waverly.
Yeah, you just send it to me. I'll-
Promise to stay by the mic this time. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Don Walsh, Development Strategies in White Plains, here on behalf of the owners of 625 Waverly. You may remember, this building was purchased by the applicants from the village on the account of a tax foreclosure. This application is to bring the building into code compliance, to obtain permission to change the site slightly by demolishing part of the building, making it smaller and creating parking, and to hopefully improve that corner of Waverly Avenue. Tonight, I'm going to, hopefully will clear up two questions that I was asked by both staff and members of the board last time. At the same time, we'll do a very brief presentation from Richard Hine, our architect, because the chairman had asked at the end of the November 4th meeting if we could see an elevation before we go further, especially to ARB, and get an idea what everything's going to look like. We have consulted with your tree folks. We have, I think I reported last time that we've chosen the dogwoods to go in there. We have all of those in the rendering. We'll pass that around and let you see that. And at the same time, just before the last meeting, we'd received from use firm some comments, some engineering comments. We passed those on to Insight, our engineers. Richard Williams, PE, who I worked for many years, is here tonight. He'll endeavor to answer those questions and give you a status update on that. This purpose is just to move us a little further along down the road. Without further ado, very quickly, number one, the question that Dan and I had opened, which was involving, if you recall, we had discovered 4 tanks in front of the building when we got there, unbeknownst to the village, and they sold it to us unbeknownst probably to anybody over a 50-year period. The only tank that wasn't completely filled in with concrete and in full compliance has been removed since that time. The closure letters have been received by the building department. All the DEC procedures were followed. There was, thank God, there was no soil issue, and the DEC has now not only closed its file as far as this is concerned, but has also closed the groundwater monitoring. They've been doing in this area for 6 years, not on account of this building, but on account of the old Happiness Laundry, which was underneath that parking lot just above us. So there do not appear to be any ongoing pollution issues of any sort, and the documentation's been filed with the building department. That's the one question I had. The second question I have is from the board, when I was asked the number of users, because as you know, even though there has been no parking, we were creating 4 parking spaces. This is a passive warehouse company. I wasn't able to represent that there could only be 1 user, or the 7 of Mr. Borak's 9 warehouses that are this size all have just 1. But this is the planning on this is being done for 2 users maximum, and I would certainly have no problem if this board put that on. This is not a self-storage individual, like when my mother-in-law passed away with all these little 10-foot, 10 by 10 cubes that we rented. This is not that. They rent to small manufacturers, to law firms, accounting firms, and that kind of thing for document storage. This building is being set up with 1 single dividing wall inside. It will have 2 separate bay doors to go in and out. The number of people that come are usually once a month when a number of things are dropped off. It's a relatively passive use. We don't expect it to be creating any traffic issues of any sort, but We thought we needed 2 parking places, but since we had the ability to create 4, we're creating 4. And that's on the pervious paving that we discussed and brought that into the board's attention. Those are the 2 questions that I had to answer. I'll come back at the very end in 5 or 10 minutes to conclude. But unless the board has any other questions for me on those topics, I'd like Richard Hine to briefly take you through the elevations and what this is going to look like. Sir?
Well, you just mentioned document storage, and it just, a light bulb went off here, and I'm
Me
thinking.
too.
I wouldn't want my documents.
In a flood zone?
In the flood zone.
No, actually, this is not,
I'm
believe it or
I'm
not.
just wondering,
As a lawyer, I wouldn't put my documents down.
This is not, actually, this is one of the only buildings down there that's not in a flood zone, but they're fully cognizant of that. And anything, when they built the one in New Jersey, which is in a similar, I call it a high water table zone, everything in there was built some distance off the floor, as was the one in Dover Plains also. I don't know if it's going to go that way or not. I simply give you that as an example. 4 of their facilities are that way. One is toys. One is equipment, where a tractor-trailer company stores tires there. One is a cable company storage facility in Wappingers, where they have rolls of cable wire. That's it. The entire building is just rolls of cable wire. So they're relatively passive in that area. I certainly wouldn't want my documents either in something that, I live on top of a mountain, for God's sakes, after living in Yonkers for many years where it got very wet. And I wouldn't want it that way either. But if there is, they will do adequate planning. This is their business. This is kind of a niche they've carved out. It's a father and son. They've been doing it for roughly 30 years. The son, like Mr. Hine, is an architect, but they use Mr. Hine to represent them in this kind of thing. And if we got to that, if they got a tenant that wanted it that way, we have all the maps and everything to show the tenant, and we also, they insure it, et cetera. So I think that's the direction that we're going in. But we would certainly accept that restriction as no more than 2 users as we go forward. Can I bring Mr. Hine on? Sure. Yeah, can we hand a copy out just so everybody can see? Okay, I did not.
This is relatively new information generated since our last visit. So that's why we thought we could.
Okay.
No, it's okay. No, we can share it. Good evening, I'm Richard Hine, the architect. As Don mentioned, pre-existing warehouse building, what we have addressed previously to the board is that there's an existing shed structure on the southerly edge of the building. If you go to A4, you'll see a streetscape photo and a close-up of that red structure. That is slated to be demolished. And forward of that would be you'll see on your site plan, the 4 parking spots on the pervious asphalt paving. The rendering at the top of the page of your sheet, Don's holding that here in a larger scale, is the existing building, which is rendered in the block on your drawing. The 3 trees indicated are forward of the existing structure, and the section with the garage door to the left of that leftmost tree is the replacement structure that would be located where the red wooden frame structure would be demolished. And as you can see, it's just simply matching essentially the lines of the existing structure.
This is smaller, right? In other words, the red frame comes down.
Yep.
And it's replaced by a building or an extension of the building, roughly a third of the size, so it can move apart. That's the.
In depth, yes. So you'll see that in the site plan. The width is as drawn, and the depth allows for the on-site parking. And as Don mentioned previously, we discussed with your treescape consultant the preferred trees to work within the limited landscape footage on the site plan. And I think other than that, it's pretty self-explanatory what the building would look like from the exterior.
The trees don't have the flowering over on the top here, they have the white bit, in other words, it would be white in certain seasons, it's the green. I just did this to show off against the white plan of the building, that's a paint scheme, white with blue trim. The unusual thing in the middle there, that lattice work, there is an outside gas series of meters, we tell the company, gas company can't move those, so we're screening them in, we just want make that more or less disappear. If you drive by it today, you'll see a slightly collapsed fence out there that we resuscitated to put the sign for this board meeting on. But the idea is that it would be rebuilt, and it would look, so it would look like a unified front. The idea of the white and blue scheme is a borax scheme, they like that kind of Dutch Delft look, and that's the way we would do it here unless R changes that. Of course it is.
Questions?
So you're using the existing, you're using most of the existing facade, I apologize. Or that's a whole,
Yes, I guess if you look at the ultimate layout here, 3/4 of the facade that you see is existing to remain, and the left section is just proposed to match.
so you proposing any work on that existing facade?
Yes, it would be cosmetically repaired and pointed and painted, as Don mentioned, but nothing in terms of renovation. Of course, we do show the windowscape and the doors that it would be indicated in plan are proposed.
So you are cutting some new
Yeah,
doors?
yeah, we're reorganizing the facade.
And from the looks of this, are you adding curb cuts or proposing to add curb cuts?
It's pretty flat there right now. What we would like to do is we take it a little bit further, is to look at, we have enough room right there now. The entire front of the building has no curbing. Part of our plan would be to put in curbing, so it would be the opposite of cutting curbs. It would be installing curbs.
And sidewalks.
And sidewalks.
To the village code.
This is where those tanks were hidden. Remember our discussion there earlier, that gave me an absolute stroke when I was like, you didn't call me before you bought it. And they were under those large pavers. Once you see, in my business, when you see large pavers, it always gives you a conniption because you figure there's something underneath the pavers. There's no reason that it would have been different. And sure enough, that's what they were. But we don't have private gas stations anymore in this area or almost any other. If there's no other question, the architecture, I'd like to bring the engineer on. If that's
Sure.
So good evening, Rich Williams, Insight Engineering. The site civil engineering aspects of this project are pretty simple and straightforward. It's about a 15,000 square foot site, as the board knows. Majority of it,
I'm sorry, do you have a, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see the mic.
okay. The majority of it is comprised of the building. There is going to be about 3,800 square feet of the 15,000 square foot site redeveloped. Of that 3,800 square feet, 1,100 square feet are going to be converted from an impervious surface to a lawn area. And 2,600 square feet is going to receive stormwater treatment, where currently none exists. The 4 spaces you heard mentioned that are being created are going to be created as a porous pavement surface. We've performed the necessary soil testing to confirm the soils can support this type of stormwater design. And with respect to water quality and peak flow analysis, we've prepared a stormwater pollution prevention plan that meets Chapter 294 of the Village Code. We do have some comments from Woodard and Curran. We reviewed those comments with Mr. Grecian. They're fairly minor. We believe they're more housekeeping. And we're going to easily, we're going to address those shortly, and they're all very easily addressed.
Questions?
The stormwater treatment goes where?
It goes in the southern corner of the site,
That's the porous pavement.
Right.
and that's where a portion of the building is being removed to actually create the 4 parking the off-street parking spaces. Again, there's no off-street parking currently at the site.
We were
So-
successful, Mr. Varney, recently. We more or less cribbed from the EPA itself. They developed it's not just pavers, it's fully porous paving. And they've been using it in their facility in Bergenfield, New Jersey. And we took that, and Richard and myself, and we just finished a site for Columbia Presbyterian in Tarrytown, Route 119. And that's a Mr. Silverman project, Mr. Gray knows, and it's 105 cars, and it works. And it doesn't absorb everything. It absorbs about 80%, but it's a heck of a lot better than what we had before. And so
that's,
we're trying it.
I'm sorry, that's porous paving,
Yes.
it's not porous concrete.
That is correct. So,
This would be porous asphalt. Both our office and Woodard and Curran, I know, has used this in numerous projects throughout the region. It's a great product if you've seen it.
But it's,
30% more, but we had to help the guys into it first, as you can imagine, but it really makes a great deal of sense.
You have to, I think, vacuum it every 2 years, I believe. That's what they recommend
Well,
to keep it.
Mr. Blau, who I believe you know know Bob and Harry, and he and I did the inspection. We opened the Columbia site together about a week ago, and we're going to try and do it every year there, just for obvious reasons. You just want to, it's a newer thing. We want to make sure it works, but we're kind of excited about it because it lets us do things.
I mean, I've seen it, nothing done for 7 years, and it still works
Yeah.
without the vacuuming, but that's what they recommend.
It's a good, I think it's just a good thing to start with. You know, and we can be a pilot project for porous paving, as Blau said, with a lot of alliteration in it. I think we'd like to give that a try here too.
So it gets absorbed right into the ground there?
Yes, underneath.
Underneath.
What makes that work actually is the subbase. You know, there's a 18 inches of subbase that goes into. If you don't have that, the porous pavement's just gonna go to
Right.
to hard pan, it's not gonna do anything.
Oh, okay.
So your design is actually all in your subbase. If you make it 24 inches, it's a 100-year storm. You make it 18, it's a 50, you know, that's just an example.
Okay.
So it's all in the subbase and the ability of the water to get to it. And in a site like this, you don't want to be digging around much, too. This practice is good for surface
flats?
treatment,
No.
close to the surface, so it's a good application.
We've used it in Nyack on a 135-unit project, and it's working out very well. Columbia, I think in Rockland County, the Lamont Observatory has used it, and there was a tree, downtown tree seminar here, I think last year, and they highlighted permeous paving and showed the differences between, I found it interesting, up in Cornell, where they'll show you, two sides of the paving, and they ask you which side is permeable and which is regular asphalt. In most cases, you pick the wrong one.
So,
It's that good.
so we've been talking about this for a while, since, in all the years I've been on the board. Why is the village not making this a requirement by code for paving in the village? I mean, just take a step back from this application. Is that a recommendation we should be making to the Board of Trustees?
It depends on your application. There are different types of porous pavement. Depending on what you do on site, sometimes that's not a good application. So were you referring to parks or any?
When would this not work for parking?
At heavy industrial use, a lot of turning, some big trucks coming in, can pose a problem. But something like this is perfect for that application.
But even in
For
a regular
lots
parking lot,
generally,
Right.
in the industrial area or elsewhere.
Or
what would be
driveways.
this-
it works.
Right. It would work, but if you're really within the flood area, then,
It doesn't matter
it
anymore.
doesn't matter anymore. It's within the last 3 to 4 years, it's a better product. There was issues with it originally. You used to clog. The other thing too is you just have to make note that you don't, come by 5 years later and pave over it with a regular top. That could happen if you're not paying attention or the next owner doesn't know. But,
Well, one way to keep, that's
Yeah,
what
that's the
that's what I'm getting
construction.
at,
Right.
is that if you build it into the code, then
Right.
it's not a site plan issue.
Well, you do a construction, the maintenance plan, that would
right.
dictate that too.
We studied it for about a year because we were very interested in this once we went to EPA's program. We're doing some work in Bergen County, New Jersey, Hudson County, New Jersey, where it's near the Meadowlands, it's another area of high water table. And this seems to work very well.
Okay.
What we're
Yeah.
doing over there.
There's a lot of hesitation on the part of developers and engineers also to use this because it's not new, but it is in their own, it isn't within their own experience, and it's difficult to get people. That's why in Nyack, we've done sustainability initiatives you have to do 30%, and you have to do a whole bunch of other things to get them off green roofs, white roofs, things like that. And that's the approach we've taken over in the other side of the river. But that's, so it's not in the code, but we encourage people to do it and they get something for it. Again, that's just an approach we've used.
I just wonder if, at some point, the time is going to come when it should be the case that you're required to use this and you need to get special permission not to use this.
Well, it's a practice that should be used in certain applications, and there's other applications that this isn't the best practice, but, right.
So understanding that, I
And
would
it-
say that you would, you would allow a process to get approval to not use it, but you'd make it the default.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily, you would just prohibit using ordinary asphalt, because there are other kinds of porous paving that you might want
Right.
storage in other
There's actually
circumstances.
porous concrete also.
Exactly, which is what you used around the swimming pool, you remember?
Right,
Yeah.
right, so there might be, I mean, your basic point is, if this is as good as, or
I'm
for
just-
any other purposes, as good as ordinary asphalt, then we ought to.
So we can
prohibit
get back to this application now. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if this board should put something on our own agenda to make a recommendation to the Board of
Yes,
Trustees
and let's
about
get back
this.
to the application.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents on
Yes,
experience.
you're absolutely right.
From a municipal consideration, there's a couple of things you got to think about, and that is, it is substantially more expensive upfront to purchase. Also, it changes your maintenance requirements, and it prohibits you from sanding. Both of those factors will affect your budgets and your highway department's budgets. So there is an environmental benefit. It is also dependent on the soil conditions you have, and, you know, you have to have the right conditions. But there's other aspects to this that.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
can
I agree
discuss-
with Lou, we should move on, but
Yeah.
if you're doing it on top of ledge, then that might not be the best application.
It all depends, it all depends. It's a good idea, it all depends, you're
And
absolutely
there's
right.
been less,
There's
there's
a
less and
whole
less sanding.
cost factor.
Almost all the municipalities have gone to all salt now. Very little application of sand, except for outside of buildings. You won't see anybody sand a road anymore in Westchester County.
The applicant may want to take back the mic and,
No, I really don't. I just wanted to, this is just something we looked at, because obviously this is a site that's almost entirely impervious. So we were just trying to come up with something a little different. Because Rich and I had just finished this other project, much larger one, we decided, let's give it a try over here. We were encouraged by your staff, and that's where we're at.
Great.
So, right now, then, I'm not sure what else I have to answer that you guys would need, so, going forward.
How about the site lighting? Do you have
We actually hadn't planned on anything except a single light over each door, and we were gonna go through that with ARB. This is not a site that operates at night. And it's right on the street, it's right underneath 2 streetlights. So, I mean, there's no area in there that we would do that. In the other 2 Borac facilities that have, especially the one that Ms. Shearer was familiar with, the one in Dover Plains, that has lights that come on when a truck comes in, you know, in case it's like 5 o'clock on a winter's day, but that's pretty much motion detector light, so if the board would like to.
This board typically insists on full cutoff fixtures for exterior lighting and.
We would accept that as a condition in any plan. We have no problem with that whatsoever. That's-
So
Yeah, the big, yeah.
and you could always put it on the plan anyway.
Yeah, we'd add that as a note if that's,
And Hugh, is there anything else that you would need to see from the applicant on this?
No, we've had discussions. I haven't got a resubmission, but they're minor.
So the answer is really yes, because the SWIP has to be approved by this board. So if you're going towards an approval, that use list got to be 0 by the time you get to December 9th, if that's.
that's why I saw your email and I wanted to be certain.
I think
that-
we can get there.
Good.
Let me ask the board this, just as one, from a personal point of view. Is there just the one meeting, December 9th?
Yes.
Okay. May have to have one of you guys handle that, because,
And then the submission would be next Wednesday. I mean, 12 days before would be next Friday, obviously, with the holidays, assuming it
Right.
would need to be by next Wednesday.
I would not want you to think that I've abandoned you, but my wife has a clinical trial in Dana-Farber that night, and I have to be in Boston, so everything's good, but, it's one of those things that I would leave my loyal assistants and associates to handle that.
Try and get everything in by next Wednesday. And
Bob, we
let's-
never missed a deadline in our lives, and if we're going to go for that December 9th, we'll have it Wednesday. And if we don't, if there's anything that's held up, we will just simply go for the next one. It's not like,
You'll make my life easier because Betty Ann won't let me put it on to Thursday.
I have worked with Betty Ann for 12 years. I am fully aware of that. I was delighted she was here.
Okay.
Is that, Mr. Chairman?
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we will
Two
look at that.
things.
There's nothing else anybody wants, by the way, besides that? I'm sorry,
Now,
Counsel.
2 things. One, you may want to, although it's not a public hearing, you may want to ask if there is any public comment. And then 2, if there is none, you may wish to, if the board's pleasure, direct the preparation of a resolution, not make a decision, but direct the preparation of a resolution pending the receipt of views information, so that on December 9th, the board might be in a position to approve it.
Okay, well, that's fine. First, is there any public comment on this? Okay, so second is, can we have a motion to authorize preparation of a resolution approving this site plan for the December 9th meeting?
So moved?
Second?
This is contingent on the lighting.
Yes, contingent on- right.
Details being out.
We'll add that.
Yes. Yes. All in
Second.
favor? You second. All in favor, Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes. Okay.
Stu, who seconded that?
I did.
Lou?
Oh, Lou did, okay.
Okay. Great. So let's move to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
526 Shore Acres Drive.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Benedict Salinitro, civil engineer. I'm here on behalf of the owners of 526 Shore Acres Drive, Mr. and Mrs. Pastakis. They're both here. The application is straightforward. We're seeking to make improvements to the existing home by adding a elevated open wood deck to the rear, modifying the existing elevated structure, and adding a small amount of impervious area. The project also includes the removal of an existing sport court of approximately 840 square feet. The total net is a decrease of impervious cover within the 100-foot buffer zone of 153 square feet. That's the project in a nutshell.
Okay, so you are putting some impervious surface into the buffer, but you are removing more than you're putting in.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
And is the area, just a clarification, the area you're removing also presently in the buffer?
Part of it is, very minor part of it,
How much
yes.
of it is and how much of it isn't?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question properly.
The question was, the portion of the impervious surface
Oh.
that you're removing, is that located in the wetland?
100%, yes.
So what is the sport court now?
It is a on-grade, semi-permeable surface of 840 square feet. We are taking credit for 50%. Some would argue it could be larger, but just the 50% of,
You're taking credit because it's semi-permeable and
Correct.
not impermeable.
that is correct. So-
What's the material?
There's a compacted stone subbase, and it's an interwoven plastic, rubberized, if you will, surface it's a term called sport court. I think there's some photographs, I have some as well if you need to see them. So it's a structure, there's a basketball hoop that's going to be removed as well. So that entire area will be turned into lawn area.
And Hugh, just to clarify, so this is ordinarily, I mean, if somebody came and wanted to put something like this in the buffer,
Right.
we would treat this as permeable or as impermeable?
Impermeable.
We would treat it as
Right.
impermeable surface, okay, so then,
And not,
Right.
the product itself, we really won't, but they're actually, when he said they took credit, it's actually to your benefit.
no, I understand, I just
Right.
want to,
Okay.
Thank you.
okay.
As a matter of fact, they did get a permit from the planning board to install the sport court years ago.
Right, before we were. as
Before you-
concerned as
right,
we are about that.
yes.
Right. Okay, anybody have questions? Ben?
No, I'm good.
John? Looks to me like an improvement. Lee?
Yes.
Okay, can we open a public hearing then on this? So can I have a motion to open a public hearing on this wetlands permit application?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes. Any public comment on this application? Can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
You can't second it until somebody
Oh,
makes the
sorry.
motion.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Second?
All right, all in favor? John?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Go ahead.
So Bob didn't have an opportunity to prepare a memo on the designation of the type of action and consistency. So what I would suggest, I think it's a type 2 action.
It's a type 2
But
action.
I think what I would suggest is rather than the board taking a formal vote at this point, you could do the same as you did on the last application, direct counsel to
Authorize
prepare.
preparation.
And then in the interim, Bob will submit that memo on those 2 issues, so you'll have the documentation you need to go forward on December 9th.
That's fine. So can I have a motion to authorize preparation of a resolution approving a wetlands permit for the application at, what was it, 520?
526.
526 Shore Acres Drive?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
I did.
John? And who seconded it?
Okay, next application is 1216 Henry Avenue. Applicant's not here? Guess we can adjourn this until next
December
meeting.
9th.
Okay.
So I think just, I would,
I guess the only thing we would mention is that the planning department has attempted to try to conduct a survey of homes in the neighborhood and was unsuccessful in getting enough data to put together that survey. I think that's.
That's the gist of it. Dan has the memo that essentially talked about how Greg went through to get the information.
Basic point is that we don't in our records have anything that
Yeah,
conforms to
the
current.
basic point is, most, if not all of these houses were built before 1968, when the zoning ordinance came into effect, and there was no requirement for them to put any of that information on any of the plans.
Right.
Absent of hiring a surveyor and an engineer to go through every house and do the calculations, it's nearly impossible to do that.
And the tax maps don't have any of that data either.
No.
Okay, the tax maps have square footage, but it's not measured
It's
in the
not
same way.
measured in the same way, and it doesn't correlate to any FAR
Any
calculations that we would do,
Right,
okay?
okay. All right, at any rate, we're just gonna put this off until the next meeting because we don't have the applicant here at this point.
well, I think the issue is if you're going to take public comment and you want the applicant to be present.
Usually, the applicant is here to, and I apologize, I didn't realize, I don't think any of us
I don't
realized
think
the
anybody in
applicant
the-
wasn't gonna be here
right,
today.
yeah.
I was under the impression he was going to.
What was the map we did get? Didn't we get a map on
Somebody
this?
comes and sits here for
What?
So we really, I mean, if people came for, or have been sitting here for hours, we can't
I mean, I think we can-
We can't hear their comment? It's really a legal problem for us to hear the comment?
Well, I don't think it's a legal problem. The notice was that this hearing would be adjourned to tonight. Typically, when an applicant doesn't appear for whatever reason, the matter gets adjourned. The board could, continue the public hearing, hear the public comment. There'd be no way for the applicant to address it at this point. And it's up to the board how they want to proceed.
Well, if we have an open public hearing, then why don't we let the people speak?
It's videotaped. I mean,
Fine.
he can look at the videotape.
I guess the only real issue is you might find it in your interest to come and say it again when the applicant is here, because the applicant's not here to hear it at this point. But we'll certainly take the opportunity to let you speak then.
The applicant's aware of the sizes of the different houses in the vicinity. Like my house is contiguous to the property.
Only one person should be
One
speaking
person
and
can-
at the
Oh,
microphone.
I'm sorry.
Can I just ask a question before we go? Didn't, Bob, did you send us a map on this with the houses? I remember receiving one.
I don't think it was a map prepared by the planning department. I think it was a map prepared by some of the neighbors.
The applicant.
Oh, okay. That was forwarded to us by the secretary.
Forwarded to us.
I see. Okay. I know I was looking at some map.
Thank you.
So, this is some information. I'm Jackie Meyer, 356 Florence Street. This is my response to the memo that was sent out saying that they couldn't collect enough data to make a comparison. When I did the submittal of the analysis, the data, I didn't use any attics, basements, or garages, or the extra buildings. So I did use the tax cards for all this information. But if we compare that to the renovated house, without using the basement, without using the attic, then we have apples to apples. We have a way to show what the square footage numbers for this renovated house versus what's in the neighborhood. I mean, if we can't use the tax cards and we don't trust those, how can we collect accurate taxes? How can we, I mean, they're accurate numbers, right? I mean, so we can't use the basement because we can't see, the elevation of the 3 feet. So if we just take it out of the consideration and we take the attic out, why can't we compare?
But you're not including the corridors and things like that, Dan. I mean, it's just the room.
Including- The tax cards are giving you the living space of each room. Our FAR calculations measures from the outside wall to the outside wall, going both ways, including everything. So you can't take those numbers that are giving you a 10 by 12 room without a bathroom, without closets, without corridors, without hallways, without any of that square footage. That also has to get included in the size of the FAR, that gets calculated for the
Right.
FAR.
So if we don't look at it for FAR, we just look at the renovated house and then the neighborhood houses. In one, we look at all the living space, or we look at the total gross space. I mean, we just look at the houses in a similar way.
What's the
but I
gross,
think the
so
prob-
what's the gross square feet?
The gross square feet of an average house in the neighborhood is, hold on, I have this.
But this is not the gross square, what you have is.
20
Is the living space.
Well, that's.
If we
that's
look
fine.
down, if we look
That's
down,
what it is.
Yeah,
we look down the sheet, okay? The average of the 40 surrounded houses, the living square footage is 1712.
No, look, we don't, but there's the living
The
square.
total gross house, which is what you asked, is 20.
That's what you have to compare to.
Right,
gross-
2690,
So
okay?
2690 is the perimeter of the entire elevation, of the entire site. No, I'm sorry, of the entire house.
Of the
That's
entire
Not counting
house.
garage, not counting.
Not
Not
counting
counting
garage.
garage,
So
Right.
that's the numbers
cellars or
that,
attic.
Right.
so that's the numbers that you are using.
That is what I have presented here.
Okay.
The house that has already been renovated, the total gross house is 4498.
You're talking the house that he built already.
Yes.
4498, and you're measuring what?
The gross house, the whole house.
The exterior of the house, the gross.
The footprint,
the-
I mean, the first floor and the second floor.
Yes.
The basement, first floor, second floor.
Okay, but the
Wait.
basement,
But the
This
basement's
is
not in.
gross house. This is gross house, as is the 2690. That's gross house.
then does the gross, hold on, does the basement of this particular house count as the FAR since it doesn't?
We're not, I don't want, see, it's too confusing to get the FAR in there. So if we just take that piece
No, no,
out.
but we're not apples to apples. So here's what we need to do. You need to look at right now, the basement of the house that he built, right? You cannot count that because it's like your house, you cannot use.
Okay, so then we can look at the living square
Yes,
footage.
Yes,
So
the
let's look
gross
at
square
that.
feet of the first floor and the
Okay.
second floor.
So maybe you could just, if I could just suggest, maybe take us through one row of your spreadsheet
That's what.
and just explain
What each number
what
means.
each number means.
Sure,
And then
okay.
then we'll know.
Okay, so we'll look at just even the first
Yeah, let's look at the first end.
1215, okay? The living square footage is the first and second floor of the house.
What does that mean? The rooms, not excluding corridors? Just the tax number.
Including corridors. It's just the square footage of the floor, the entire floor.
And where do you get that data from?
The tax cards.
But we understand that's not a number that's used on the tax cards.
I have copies of the tax cards, which I can submit,
No,
but.
I understand, but what our building inspector is telling us is that the numbers on the tax cards include only the sum of the rooms that are the living space, but doesn't include any hallways or other spaces.
It does include the hallways. There is a diagram of the house, and it says 20 by, 35. And you can calculate.
So you're talking about, you're doing actually a perimeter.
Well, I also did a footprint, if we want to continue down the.
Perimeter and the footprint is basically the same thing. So you did the footprint of the first floor.
Lee, why don't you give that over to Dan?
Yeah,
Yeah, when you get finished with it.
yep.
I mean, the frustrating thing is, okay, I'm not going to get into that. Okay.
But if you wanna-
So the first 1215, so the living square footage, first and second floor. The square footage of the whole house includes a basement, if there is one, a garage, It includes all the buildings, okay? The square footage of the yard is the square footage of the acreage of the land.
And this, you also took this from the tax record.
It's all from the tax records. The footprint that I've added to this document is one floor, the first floor, okay? So then I have a percentage of the footprint of the land, and then this far that I calculated without the basement, without the attic.
Okay. But we're not gonna.
We're not gonna
You're not gonna look at that. Let's not look at that. I think that's a wise thing. So if we look at the last sheet, a second sheet, there is the renovated house on Lot 2. The living square footage is 2443. If we go right up above that, the average house in our neighborhood living is 1713. The average footprint of the renovated house, if we skip over a couple of spaces, is 1309. The average footprint in our house, in our neighborhood, is 982.
Okay.
So are there questions?
So how come there's no average percentage of footprint to land? It seems.
It's hard to have an average of that.
Oh, that's for the,
Yeah,
yeah,
it gets,
for the whole neighborhood. That's the
Just wa-
average.
You just weight it by the size of the land, I mean, why is that hard? I mean, it just seems like you've calculated that column,
Well,
you ought to have, you actually ought to show that.
But it's
Well, the
by-
Either
average-
weight it or
by a
don't
lot.
weight it, but-
okay, the average footprint to land, the average is 14%. You see that one row that has
Oh, I
nothing?
see that.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Additive,
yeah.
it's all additive in the previous line. And then this is divided by,
Oh,
the
yeah.
next line is divided by
Right.
the number of houses.
Right.
Okay, so that is the
So-
average, okay.
So
great.
14% is
Okay,
the
great.
footprint
Right.
for the
Get it.
average, 22% is for the renovated house.
I got you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so, so already, the house that's been renovated is 33% bigger than our average house.
How did you choose these houses?
They are the 40 houses, like, closest around. I mean, I have the other diagram that I brought months ago.
Yeah, it's all the houses on Henry Park.
It's right in there. I mean, I tried to be very
Okay, I
specific.
just want to make sure it's not.
Yeah. Well, I also noted,
I think this is every
skewed
house.
against.
no, I mean, I also
Yeah.
noted on the graph, there are 4 two-family houses in this neighborhood that are larger. You know, so
You've
that's
included
noted.
those in your average anyway.
I've included them, but
Yeah.
it's noted there.
But the numbers would be smaller were it not for the two-family house.
Exactly. So, so I feel like we can get numbers here. I mean, this is kind of a clear picture to me in a graph, you know, in the table. And if the numbers aren't presenting enough of a clear picture, of a visual picture, all you have to do is drive down Florence Street and take a right on Henry. The house that's there is just enormous
We've all been
compared. Okay, have you seen it finished? It's almost finished now. It does look even bigger. So I just urge you to drive by and see it. And I also urge the planning department to confirm these numbers, because I think that you can get an accurate picture.
No, we agree. I live in a neighborhood.
Okay.
I drive by the house every day, and now it looks bigger, you're right. But the white siding, whatever it puts on, it looks bigger. So yes, the house looks huge compared to the other houses. The idea now is what we do with the houses, side-by-side houses. So
Yeah.
these numbers are actually helpful. This is
Yeah.
helpful. This is definitely helpful. This will definitely help us gauge
So,
what direction.
But you have to understand the context in which this is presented. If this board was a zoning board and there was a variance application, the consideration of the character of the community would have a bigger role. On the other hand, this is a subdivision application that is zoning compliant. So the planning board does have ability within its tool chest to make some adjustments, but it has to remember in using that tool that the the zoning, that the subdivision that's being presented is zoning compliant, and that, as the applicant has said on other occasions, if these houses, the existing houses were to be torn down for whatever reason, they could build similarly larger houses, because the zoning permits it. And so when someone else is taking a look at this application from on high, the fact that it's zoning compliant is going to be very significant. Now, the board, in connection with its seeker responsibilities, can take a careful look at these community character issues, but it has to keep it all in context.
And that's been the struggle of everyone here, to keep everyone within the same.
So, but it does result in the character of the neighborhood, right? And the character of the neighborhood is what we address here at the planning board.
Well, the character of the neighborhood, insofar as the village board in establishing the zoning permits these size houses. So the village board has made that determination that these size houses, as a matter of zoning compliance, are permitted, but now subdivision approval has been sought, so it raises another level of analysis. But I'm just trying to tell you that there are other factors.
I understand that, and I mean, I think the zoning isn't right. I mean, you drive around our village, I know it's not in my control. How do we work on that?
That's not in the
Because
planning board's control,
Well,
I just want to point out.
in this
They
case,
cannot vary the
it can
zoning.
be because it's a subdivision, right? They have some say.
I think I've laid
Yes.
that out.
Can I make
Okay,
a
I
suggestion
just-
just to the board? As I was initially in favor of taking public comment, and I think this was extremely useful, and I thank you for it. I would actually, though, say that, given that the applicant isn't here, we should actually limit our discussion of these
see.
issues. Take the comment, which
okay,
was great,
okay.
and actually move on.
Okay, I understand. All right, thank you. I appreciate you hearing us.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
I really will try to be quick. So, and I wrote a letter which I will distribute to you. But my name is Nora Lucas. I'm an architectural historian. I have a specialty in late 19th century, early 20th century neighborhoods. So what I actually do is evaluate these kinds of impacts on historic neighborhoods. And that does not necessarily mean a neighborhood that's a designated historic neighborhood, but it's a neighborhood that's established with character. And I think that Jackie was on the money with this, that I'm calling it star FAR, because it's just a comparison of the first and second stories, which is exactly what is being proposed for, it's exactly the calculations that are on the plans that the developer has proposed. And I just find it stunning. The star FAR of the existing house was 0.1. What's being proposed is, 0.47. That's a big difference. These two houses, if they are built, will be essentially the two biggest houses in the neighborhood. They'll be bigger than 96% of everything else. And we are taking this big open space that had one sort of large house with a couple of outbuildings, putting ramping up the center house on steroids, and then subdividing the property, making 3 big houses. That's a very, very big change in the character of the neighborhood. Made more problematic because the road slopes. So I think that the fact that you all asked for some information that the village couldn't supply is an indication that you're aware that the character of the neighborhood can be compromised. The neighbors have expressed concern about stormwater and about rock chipping. And I feel like this has gone on for a really long time. And, Mr. Steinman addressed seeker. This does not seem to me to be a candidate for a neg deck. I think that the project was segmented. The developer bought property, enlarged the center house, and then decided to subdivide it. You've talked about making that lot bigger and making lots smaller, but the developer basically said he doesn't want to have to deal with houses. He doesn't want to build a home that has value. Doesn't want to compare these homes to houses that were built 80 years ago, and he won't agree to any square footage that is less than what's allowed by code. You have the ability to put some modifications on this, and I think that really the developer should be forced to address the environmental concerns and not put the burden on the residents or on the planning department. I think this is really a candidate for a positive declaration, and I think that these issues should be explored through seeker. So thank you. And can I give you this letter? Just who do I give it to?
Would you give it to Bob? Sure. Thank you. Oh, I only get one?
I think, no. I think you have like.
Keep one.
Sean Gormley, 1104 Park Avenue. Mrs. Steinman, you're putting the cart before the horse. And I don't understand, he doesn't have the zoning rights, he doesn't have the as-of rights. He's requesting this, and, you know, you're using parameters here that are, they're not available right now. And that's right, the planning board has that. You're speaking purely from a legal point of view. And we are asking, these statistics that our colleague here brought up, Jackie Meyer, are phenomenal. I don't understand why our colleague here could not put something together, at least to compare apples to apples, and that's a very, 33%, 33% is a big number here, gentlemen, and he does not have an as-of right, he doesn't even have a subdivision right.
Obviously, we will be taking this up again when the applicant does come, so, I mean, certainly if you'd like to speak, it's fine with us, but.
I think it's 5 or 6 months we've been coming here back and forth. I'm Angelo Mustick at 1211 Park Avenue. My house is contiguous to the one on Henry Street, the back of it. I have 50 by 100 plot in back of it. And my house is not more than 1,800 square feet. I just want to emphasize the size of my house, which is contiguous, and Dave's house is right next door to mine. And Sean just spoke about his house. It's a two-family house on that corner of the property. And all of you were there that Saturday when we went out to look at the site, and you've seen this monster that we have there now, which is in excess of 4,000 square feet. And I've been in the building line all my life, and we take the footprint of the building, the first floor, the second floor, the actual footprint, and Marshall Swift is how we come up with square footage. The house that he has now on Lot 2 is it's a monster. It's over 4,000 square feet. Now, I just want you to take that into consideration in the character. And the attorney brought out that you do have the authority. I used to be the chairman of the zoning board in the village of Mamaroneck. You do have the authority to request that this builder, in all due respect to him, to build a smaller house. Now, he's talking about 2,500 square feet. And what was brought out tonight to this board, that there's not a house in that area that was built before 1969, that more than 2,000 square feet. So I request that you please take that into consideration. You do have the authority, as the attorney spoke to you tonight about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, again, there'll certainly be more discussion of this when the applicant is here, presumably at the next meeting.
Adjourn to December 9th.
Adjourn to December 9th, I think that's right. Okay, that brings us to the Board of Trustees referral on the LWRP draft update. And Bob, could you summarize for us what that, where that leaves us?
I'm sorry, where are we?
The Board of Trustees referral on the LWRP draft update?
Well, this is.
Yeah, I'm not precisely sure, but I
Not
can
either.
give you some of the background.
Right.
Over
seen this
the,
before.
over the last several years, the Board of Trustees working, and a separate committee that was established, working with BFJ Planning, had developed various iterations of a proposed update to the LWRP. And the latest version of that is labeled December of 2014. Thereafter, there was a request by the Harbor and
That was sent to.
but let me just go. Thereafter, there was a request by the Harbor and Coastal Commission that they be allowed to examine that document in detail and present recommendations with regard to revisions of that document. So, and the trustees agreed to that, sent it over to the Harbor and Coastal Commission, and they established a working group of citizens and prepared their own version of the LWRP update. And now, and both of these versions had been sent up for various reviews by the Department of State. Now the Board of Trustees has requested the HCZM and the working group to embellish their version based on comments from DOS, and also review the December 2014 version and see if there are things that ought to be incorporated in the HCZM's version that are not. That process is presently ongoing. So I don't really know at, which maybe the board is, the trustees are asking you to look at the HCZM version now and comment on it. I'm really not sure exactly what they're requesting.
There's no memo that tells us what we're supposed to do?
Do you have the referral?
You have the referral right here.
Let's see, voted to
referral
refer the
also went back to
LWRP draft, and I don't know which LWRP, let me just see which, if I can figure it out from the resolution. Was the village, formed the working group, where's the, never resolved the board request, HCZ, okay, complete. Department requests the planning board and zoning board to provide comments and feedback directly to the HCZM. I guess it's their draft, the HCZM's draft of the LWRP. Now, have you provided that to?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what they're asking you to put.
So now that we understand what we're supposed to do, let's put that off, and we'll try to do that by our next meeting.
Wait, so we keep putting this off?
Well, look, we can't.
So, no, I understand, we're not gonna do it now, but what is it we're gonna do
We're
at our
supposed to
next
give
meeting?
comments to the Harbor and Coastal Zone Commission on this? Or comments on their draft?
I guess the Board of Trustees.
So you would like us to read this draft and, so that we.
I wouldn't like you to, but the Board of Trustees apparently wants us to
asking you to
read
do
this.
it, to read it, yeah.
So we will read this draft and provide comment and put together a
any comments that we might-
response as a
right,
board next
right.
week, next meeting.
Right.
And HCZM also received the same,
CBA, you mean?
CBA, no, the HCZM also received the same information, a referral, and they're supposed to refer back to the.
The
You're just leaving
no,
it
the
alone on
the
this one?
HCZM's
No
charge,
memos? No support?
the HCZM's charge is to take the comments they got from the Department of State, to look at the December 2014 version and come up with a final version of their document for submission to the Board of Trustees. That's their charge.
Would it be beyond their purview to recommend abolition of the LWRP as a complete waste of time?
No comment.
No comment.
No comment.
I would vote for that, by the way.
No, I think that, there are many people in this community who believe completely the opposite.
I know they do.
And this is
Right.
this has been a very significant undertaking, which a lot of people have put a lot of time into, so.
And this is also why the Department of State is actually, a conversation I've had with them on another matter. A lot of these updates are taking a very, very long time. That's what they're finding in the state. And they're actually emphasizing, they're allowing brief revisioning and whatever, and putting in projects even without the updates. But they're finding that it's a problem for the Department of State with staffing and with also, it's taking an inordinate amount of time in the communities. So this is not unusual.
I understand, but that's the point, is this takes so much energy and effort, and the payoff is so small by contrast, but.
Is your point that we're spending so much time in planning and HCZM anyway that,
Yeah,
that it almost is a non-issue?
Yeah, But that's not gonna
Well,
happen.
I mean, would there be any benefit to have someone from a representative of either HCZM or the working group explain, what the, their objectives were in doing this?
That's fine, I would have no objection to that.
So, I mean, maybe we can send out that request to come to your December 9th meeting, so you give it some background, which I think would be helpful.
And don't forget, I think that you had provided some input in an earlier referral. I don't think it was the HCZM, I think it was comments from the HCZM, because I remember one thing about wetlands, and that was something that they had said, maybe it was less, but the HCZM they wanted to take over the wetlands because they're doing docks and whatever. My comment back, and I don't know if it was accepted by the board, but split it so that when the planning board is just doing wetlands permits, that's what they should do. If HCZM is doing a dock, and they could do wetlands at the same time, just to streamline things for applicants. But that was the only comment I remember.
I mean, you can focus on the extent the document affects your jurisdiction. If you want to limit it that, you can take a broader view, it's up to you.
It would be great to have an executive summary of the changes.
That's a problem. Nobody has that because there was never a red line version of the two. So there isn't that available to me. You know, that's one of our problems in kind of grasping the changes, because we have two side-by-side documents, but they're not integrated in terms of the changes that were made from one to get to the other.
Wait,
And-
these are
and
the
w-
two proposals.
Yeah, and-
Versus
and-
the
and-
existing LWR,
Right.
there's also that diff.
That's correct.
as
So,
well.
and the existing LWRP has 44 policies. The December 2014 version is limited to 13 based upon guidance that they had received. The HCZM version goes back to the 44 policies.
Huh.
And
So-
I guess there's some.
That sounds like a big difference. I mean, you know,
You can take policies and put them together. you can
Right, yeah.
separate them.
well,
Yeah.
I don't know, I always had trouble with 44 seems crazy to me.
Yeah, this was an attempt encouraged by the state to reduce it to 13. The state model was 13, and then when they went back to DOS and they said, could we still do 44? They basically said, yeah, do what you want, as long as you don't contravene any of the state policies, we'll be okay with it. So maybe the first step would be to just, if we can get someone to come in and give you a little background on it, it would be helpful, and maybe highlight issues that you could look at, because otherwise it's a hard thing to just look at the two large documents and try to figure out, you know, where to go with it.
Great.
So we'll pass that along and see if.
Rather than someone coming on the 9th, had we talked about having a joint meeting with HCZM anyway to discuss such things as bulking, as consistency, as occurred on the
We did, and
post road?
I don't know how big an agenda you want to have.
Well, I'm saying that's why it might not be, let's see the documentation first before the next meeting, and I don't know if we need to have.
You have it already.
We have the document.
You have it, so it's there. I just thought it might be helpful to kind of
You just have
direct you
somebody
through it.
explain.
Yeah, how they got from document A to B, and what.
I was saying if we're going to have that meeting, annual meeting that we talked about, that it might be able to kill two birds with one
I
stone.
think the timing is such that probably will not get arranged in the holiday season, so.
And what Paul talked about was there was always an annual meeting when he was mayor of the various land use boards, really just the chairs primarily.
Mhm.
But we've never had anything that he was asking about with this particular, which isn't a bad idea, but that wasn't what he was really, what he actually did back in those days. It wasn't joint meetings.
I think it's a bad idea, though.
It's not a bad.
I don't think it's a bad idea.
No, it's not a bad idea at all.
You know?
All right, so, but in the meantime, what we'll do is we'll put this over and take a look at these documents.
Okay.
Would it help if you had your comments back? I think you had comments back, earlier on, and kind of resurrecting those comments and see what they were.
Sure.
I don't know when that was, but we can find that, I guess.
If there is something in the record, we should have it. I don't recall.
Yeah, I think there was something
There
with,
was
it
something.
certainly dealt with the jurisdiction over wetlands.
Well, I think that's right. And then the idea was making sure we streamlined and we didn't have
Right,
multiple
right, right.
applications.
Yeah, that I remember,
That
but I
I
don't
remember.
remember anything else, but we'll,
I don't remember anything else either.
Yeah.
So there are two items that I'd like to get on our agenda.
we still
Well,
have,
we'll have
We still have two
we
resolutions.
still have some matters
Oh.
left. Is that all right?
If you want to,
Well, okay, that's fine, we can,
Well,
wherever you'd like to insert that conversation into the agenda is fine with me. So I just want to make sure before we adjourn.
The last one we have a body for is sitting here, and that's the wetland permit on the next item.
all right, so why don't we do these first and then we'll raise this? Okay,
Yeah,
so.
let Dan out of here at some reasonable hour.
First, I have a motion to approve the.
Wait, hold on a minute. This is, let me,
Was this Gilbert clear?
Yeah.
yeah, Gilbert, we still haven't closed the public hearing yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. So can we close the public hearing? I'm having to have a motion to close the public hearing on the wetland permit application for the Gilbert Pier at 1050 Nautilus Lane.
So moved?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Okay.
And also, at the last meeting, we indicated this was a type 2 action, but you should formally do that. It's a type 2 action under 617.5C10, which is a minor accessory structure to a residence.
Okay, can I have a motion to declare that this is a type 2 action under SECRA?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
All in favor of Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And also the LWRP approval, we've looked through the recommendations, the policies. I think we looked at all 44, and there's nothing that substantially hinders the achievement of those policies.
That's fine. Can I have a motion to the effect that this is consistent with the LWRP?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And I'll just say for the record that I do not remember in my tenure on this board that we ever did not decide that whatever was before us was consistent with the LWRP.
Well, remember, though, that the only types of actions you're getting are type 2 actions.
Right, right.
And actually, the legislation we're proposing to Chapter 240
Would eliminate
type 2 actions
that
for
would be great.
consistency, yeah.
Actually, I want
It's fairly
number of the
common.
comment, that's what I'm
Comment,
saying.
Another municipality. So now it's on the
Now can we
application.
have a motion to approve the application for a wetland permit for Gilbert Pier?
Pursuant to this resolution?
Yes, pursuant to the resolution. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Lou?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Bob, do you have
Yeah.
this change, just in case?
Do I have
gave
one?
this to you.
I'll sign those, but now, 532 West Boston
Property.
Post Road.
We'll take a look at this. make sure you-
Les, did we close the public hearing on 532 West Boston Post?
Yes.
Yes.
So we can
Many
just vote
years
on this
ago.
one at this point, right?
Yes, yeah.
All right, so there is a, can I have a motion to approve the resolution for the site plan and special permit application for construction of 7 townhouses at 532 West Boston Post Road?
So moved.
Second?
Can I just ask, because we had some discussion about how in the resolution was it handled the question about the trellises and the bulking?
The approving the plan that the HCZM approved.
HCCM approved,
Okay.
okay. So we had a motion, it was seconded? You had you made the motion?
Yes.
Anybody seconded?
I really don't want to second this, but I really don't. I mean, I thought that we had some sort of
I thought the discussion at the last meeting was that there was enough consensus of the board to approve this, and that's why the resolution was drafted.
we were asking for HCZM to get back.
No, this,
We-
after that,
During this
after
Ah,
that,
sorry.
there was a consensus to approve.
Okay.
I mean, the problem is there was a consensus of the board, and we have a slightly different composition.
Well, yeah,
today.
you may have to put it over if you want until you have a full board.
Then I vote no.
Yeah,
Well, then I think we better put it over,
Yeah.
because there would be 2 votes of no, so
Yeah.
that would be,
so why don't you just adjourn it?
so why don't we just adjourn
I
it?
think it's a total embarrassment if we vote yes to something like this.
Okay, so we'll just put this over to our next meeting. Now, Lee, you wanted to raise the other question, which,
Yeah. So I would like to get 2 items on our agenda. One I discussed earlier was the pervious pavement. And it would, we've been talking about it and putting it in piecemeal, and it seems like this is an idea that, whose time has come, and we should make some kind of a recommendation to the Board of Trustees to, increase its usage in the village. So it would be great to get more information from our consultants on what our options are there and make some kind of recommendation. So I would like to see that as an agenda item.
so there are two related issues, I'm not sure. One is use by the village itself, and second is, as a regulatory matter, requiring use of pervious surfaces.
I think we should consider making recommendations on both of those.
Okay, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but they're 2 somewhat different
Yep,
issues.
yep.
There's nothing that precludes it right now, but you just want to make that, just to, try to, encourage the use more. But
Right.
if some I would never discourage using it myself in particular applications, and we're not doing, we just don't see a lot of it.
Or require it. We just hear, applicants saying this is great,
Is
it's now
there-
cost-effective.
As much as I agree with you, you can't make that a requirement.
I agree. I think you can encourage it. I don't think you should,
Right.
I think we can require it.
Well, first of all, it's, there's a code, there's a state code that consultants and contractors go by, and
Well, can't we be
If it's-
more restrictive than that if we wanted to be?
I think in certain areas, I think in certain types of construction that the city, that the Village of Mamaroneck does, I mean, work that the Village of Mamaroneck does, I mean, we should, but when it comes to private development, I don't know, how do you enforce that? I mean, even though I'm in agreement, but how do you do that? How do you enforce that?
Well, here's what I would suggest, is that, I mean, I don't know whether Hugh or someone else can do some investigation to see whether any other municipalities have started to do what Lee is suggesting.
you have the,
And to maybe provide us some guidance on what options other municipalities have already used before we start reinventing the wheel and try to figure out how to do it. And so if we could get
That's the
some
problem.
research on that, I think that would be helpful as a first step.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't know what the right answer is either. I just
Right, no, no, but-
would like to have, a informed discussion about it.
Right,
wait,
and I
no,
think
you're
a
right.
good
There
place
was
to
no
start
right
is to
there,
see
that's right.
what options are out there, what other alternatives there are.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
So-
I also agree with Hugh, though, it depends on the application, and I don't want it to become a bit of a Trojan horse that, well, I have this type of pavement, so I don't have to do other things, because in some places, like the application we just had on a steep slope on ledge, it's not gonna work as well, so you have to
Yeah, and
provide for other.
Yeah, that's just an example, not to get into it too much, but if you actually have a steep slope, what happens is all the water just goes to the bottom and comes out.
Yeah.
You can envision that,
Right.
so it has to be a flat surface, and again, we'll encourage it, it certainly has its place. I'm involved with village projects now where Village Mamaroneck projects where they're encouraging it. The new pier reconstruction, we're going to be using porous pavement out there. It is something that's in design on village projects as we speak. And it's very good in certain applications. Another application that you would never use it in is a gas station. You have a gas spill that's going to go immediately into the ground, and you're digging up the whole parking lot. That's just an example of where you wouldn't use it, but that doesn't mean there's plenty of applications to use it. And the product is getting to the point where it makes sense to use it. And there's, like I said, asphalt porous pavement is just one. There's actually concrete porous pavement. There's actually a glass material porous pavement. There's a rubber-based porous pavement. And they all have different applications. The rubber base being walkways. It's called FlexiPave is one. And we've used that throughout the county as Woodard and Curran as a firm in parks and various other applications.
Okay. So, but if you could
Right.
find out, Hugh, how
Yeah.
other municipalities have been handling this, both as a regulatory matter
Right.
and as a user, that would be
Right.
helpful. And that way, if we wanted to make some recommendations, we could do it in an educated way so that we weren't doing something that was completely inconsistent with what other municipalities have decided to do.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So in your second issue, I think I know what it is, which, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you,
I'm in favor of it too.
Okay, so this has to do with Stu's discussion, a few months back about potentially making a recommendation to the Board of Trustees about lowering FARs in the village. And it seems to me there's a consensus that we, as a board, want to do that. So I want to make sure we get that on the agenda and make that actually happen.
What I can do is I can try to draft a memo, and then we can take it from there.
Sign those.
Yeah, I'll sign those too. Okay, but I think that it makes sense to put that on the agenda,
Okay.
but not until we
But
prepare.
lowering FAR, I mean, in certain areas it makes sense, but others.
Well, that's what I'm going to say, how do
We're
you
not-
designate which areas you
No,
do
no.
it?
Well, I mean, look, one start would be to eliminate the garage exclusion of 400 square feet everywhere, and leave the FAR as is.
That's the cleanest and,
Clean, easy, that exclusion makes no sense at all, because it just encourages people to build garages. And
I think only New Rochelle actually has that. There's one other community. It's not common.
right, and if we did that and otherwise left the FAR in place, in the areas where it's most critical, we'd be reducing the FAR by almost 20%, just by doing that. And I think that would go a long way to getting where we're trying to go.
And then it also, we had this discussion, but it also gets into a very, like with this person application, gets into a very unnecessary conversation with the applicant where you're beginning to say, is it in the, is it underneath the, whatever. It
Right.
gets messy.
Yeah, I mean, this has the advantage of also simplifying the code.
Yes.
And
Well,
enforcement, and, you
And it
know,
would have an enormously positive aesthetic effect on the village, because there's so many areas where now what a house is a two-car garage sitting in front of the house and nothing else, because the garage is free, it doesn't count
yeah.
towards FAR.
Right.
And it just aesthetically is inconsistent with the neighborhoods in which the houses are being built, because that's not what was there before.
But even if people still want to do that, because modern-wise, you go into the garage, you go into the house, but then you pay a penalty for that.
Exactly. And I think you would find fewer of them, that's all.
you know, or more one-car garages.
Right. But anyway, I will try to put together a memo. It may not be for the next meeting, but sometime over the next month.
It would be good to put that into context in terms of, we've had a number of minor subdivisions over the last year and 2 years, and
Yeah,
this
where
has
this has
become
been an issue each
problematic
time,
and
yeah.
whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, and we've gotten pretty, you know, pretty clear feedback from the public.
That this is just-
That they're looking for a change like this.
Yeah. So I think it's fine. I think we can put that on the agenda.
It's interesting you raised New Rochelle, because in the neighborhood that I came from before I came here, Forest Heights, they actually were encouraging garages behind the houses, because it would prevent people from parking in the front driveway. But actually, but there was deed restrictions that said you had to park at the back of your property in a detached garage. So that was a different application.
Every community is different. I mean, for example, Nyack, in the code, they encourage it to be very similar to that, where it's detached and at the back. But Nyack is doing that because there's smaller properties and it's more quaint and whatever, and they feel it's more historic and more in keeping with the character and scale of the village.
Well, these were larger properties and was encouraging people to park in the back. It was against the deed restrictions in the neighborhood to park on the street. You were not allowed to park on the street at night.
Yeah.
So it's a different way to go.
Okay.
Great. All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? I have a feeling that will be passed unanimously. Okay, I'll take that as unanimous approval of the motion to adjourn. Thanks a lot.
Sure.